Please be seated. Welcome back to the afternoon session of the 7th Transatlantic Summit of the Political Network for Values, Free Speech versus Regulated Speech, Strengthening the Pillars of Democracy. The first panel of this afternoon brings us the perspective of academia, culture, and media as sanctuaries of freedom. Panel chair is Mr. Adam Kawiczański, president of the Foundation for a Civic Hungary, the political foundation of Fidesz. He graduated from the Faculty of Public Administration of the Ludovica University of Public Service. The focus of Mr. Kawiczański's work is on strengthening the Hungarian identity of communities both inside and outside of Hungary. He has held different roles within the Foundation for a Civic Hungary, and since 2021 is the chairman of its board of trustees. He is currently a candidate to the European Parliament for Fidesz. Speakers have 10 minutes and commentators have a maximum of 5 minutes. Speakers are Fernando Sanchez, former ambassador to the Holy See and president of the Catholic University of Costa Rica, Albino Mario Fantini, director of the European Conservative from Italy, Jay Richards, member of the Political Network for Values Council of Experts and Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and Father Benedict Keeley, Catholic priest from the United Kingdom. Comments will be from Bart Jan Sprucht, opinion editor for CNE News Netherlands, and Polonia Castellanos, Political Network for Values Council of Experts member and president of Christian Lawyers Foundation, Spain. Thank you, Mr. Kawiczański.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, please let me start in my mother tongue. My welcoming remarks will be delivered in Hungarian, in the spirit of academic freedom, but of course, interpretation is available for those who may not yet understand the wonderful Hungarian language. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, kedves barátaim, tisztelettel köszöntöm Önöket Brüsszelben, Európa politikai hatalmának egyik legfontosabb helyszínén. És mielőtt bárki félreértene, a hatalom önmagában nem ördögtől való. Erről már Európa egyik nagy államférfia is világosan beszélt. Konrad Adenauer úgy fogalmazott, a hatalom önmagában nem rossz dolog, de a hatalom rossz dologgá válhat birtokosai kezében. Ez a mondat ma talán aktuálisabb, mint valaha. Az elmúlt években ugyanis nem csak azzal kellett szembesülnünk, hogy egyes európai intézmények megbuknak a saját jogállamisági vizsgáikon, hanem azzal is, hogy demokráciából sem vizsgáznak jelesre. Köztük az Európai Parlament legnagyobb frakciója, az Európai Néppárt sem. Elég csak, hogyha a legutóbbi európai parlamenti választások időszakára gondolunk, amikor egy legitim európai politikai közösség, az ECR csúcsjelöltjét önkényesen nem hívták meg a csúcsjelölti vitákra. Vagy elég, amikor arra gondolunk, hogy a Netcom Brussels konferenciát megpróbálták betiltani, és csak egy kisebb szabadságharc árán sikerült ezt megakadályozni. És akkor engedjék meg, hogyha már a szólásszabadság fontosságáról fog szólni a mai beszélgetésünk, hogy felidézzük azt is, mire hivatkozva tiltották be egy évvel ezelőtt a National Conservatism konferenciát Brüsszelben. A polgármesteri határozat indoklása szerint ugyanis az esemény célja az volt, hogy a média, az egyetemi és a kulturális élet, valamint a politika olyan szereplőit gyűjtse egybe, akiket egy közös, úgynevezett nacionalista társadalomfelfogás köt össze. A hatóságok azt állították továbbá, hogy e körbe tartozó személyek közül többen közismerten szélsőséges nézeteket képviselnek. Különösen a konzervatív jobboldal, a vallásosság, illetve az európai szélső jobboldal vonatkozásában. A tiltás indoklása szerint mindez azért volt különösen problémás, mert a konferencia az ő megítélésük alapján nem tudományos jellegű eseményként, és akkor most tessenek figyelni, hanem inkább vitákat kiváltó fórumként kívánt működni. Nemzeti és nemzetközi szinten egyaránt a nemzet és a közösség fogalmainak központba állításával. De tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, itt az üde és a kivételes happy end, és ezért is bír különös jelentőséggel, hogy a belga igazságszolgáltatás végül egyértelműen kimondta, adminisztratív eszközökkel nem lehet elhallgattatni legitim politikai véleményeket, így a netconnak a betiltása az jogellenes volt. De arról sem feledkezhetünk meg, amikor az Európai Parlament, hogyha már itt ebben az épületben ülünk, harmadik legnagyobb frakciója, a patrióták nem kapták meg azokat a parlamenti pozícióikat, amelyek demokratikusan megilletnék őket. Ezzel választók millióit másodrendű polgárokként kezelték. Mindez azt a benyomást kelti, hogy a demokrácia csak akkor számít, ha ők nyernek. A demokrácia csak akkor számít, hogyha a baloldal nyer. Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, innen érkeztünk el panelünk provokatív címéhez. Az akadémiát, a kultúrát és a médiát a szabadság menedékeiként határozzuk meg. De valóban azok, vagy inkább egy olyan évtizedek óta dédelgetett illúzióval állunk szemben, amely egyre kevésbé állja ki a valóság próbáját. Hazámban, Magyarországon az akadémia, a kultúra és a média világáról szerzett tapasztalataink tanulságosak. Először is. A Magyar Tudományos Akadémia rendszeresen fogalmaz meg politikai állásfoglalásokat. Ezek szinte kizárólag a konzervatív, keresztény világnézetű kormányt bírálják. Tagsága történelmi okokból döntően a liberális, baloldali elitből áll. És ez a zártság az utánpótlásban is jól érzékelhető. Ami a magyar kultúrát illeti. 1990, a kommunizmus bukása óta Magyarországon a kulturális élet szabadon és cenzúra nélkül működik. Ugyanakkor politikai küzdelmek itt is zajlanak. Előfordul, hogy kortárs színházi előadásokban ma is élő, aktív, konzervatív világnézetű személyeket álnéven idéznek meg, majd rituálisan meggyilkolnak a színpadon. Mindezek ellenére fontos tény, hogy az elmúlt 15 évben a polgári kormányzás idején a színházak és a társulatok száma megduplázódott. Szabadság hiányról tehát nehéz lenne itt beszélni. Végezetül néhány szó a médiáról. A média világban Magyarország szinte különleges esetnek számít Európában. A konzervatív és a liberális baloldali sajtó aránya a legtöbb becslés szerint kiegyenlített, közel 50-50%-os. Több mint 2100 online médium működik országos, megyei és helyi szinten, van kormánybarát és ellenzéki televízió, és a nézettségi adatok alapján itt is kiegyensúlyozottságról beszélhetünk. Az internetes közéleti műsorok 100 000-es eléréseket produkálnak, még ha az objektív és független jelzők használata sokszor inkább naivitásról árulkodik. Nem kívánok most kitérni sem a közelmúltbeli BBC botrányra, sem más nyugati média botrányokra, ezt majd megteszik helyettem az itt helyet foglaló kiválóságok. Egy dolgot azonban érdemes kimondani, minden média terméknek vannak tulajdonosai, finanszírozói, és ezáltal vannak elvárásai is. A vélemények szabad áramlásának egyetlen valódi garanciája a pluralitás, a sokféleség. Az egyenlő esély arra, hogy különböző világnézetek és politikai közösségek saját felületeken fogalmazhassák meg gondolataikat. Közel fél évszázadnyi diktatúra tapasztalatával a hátunk mögött, és ezt személyes meggyőződéssel, magyar szemüvegen keresztül mondhatom, pontosan tudjuk, mi a különbség a szabadság és a szabadság hiánya között. És azt is tudjuk, hogy a 20. század totális diktatúrái nem a semmiből születtek. Ezért panelünk témája valódi forró krumpli. Aligha van köztünk bárki, aki ne tapasztalta volna meg, milyen hamis tud lenni az az állítás, hogy az akadémiák, a kultúra terei vagy a média világa automatikusan menedéket jelent a szólásszabadság számára. Éppen érdemes erről ma őszintén, nyíltan és vitára készen beszélgetnünk. Köszönöm szépen, hogy meghallgatták a bevezetőmet. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist is Alvino Mario Fantini, our great friend, editor-in-chief of the European Conservative and managing director of the European Documentation and Information Center in Vienna. He is a journalist and editor with a truly international background, having worked in Europe, Latin America, and Asia, including the Wall Street Journal in Brussels, trained in philosophy and public policy. His work focuses on academic freedom, cultural pluralism, and the growing pressure of ideological conformity in universities and in the media. So, dear Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Adam. Good to see you, and good to see so many of my friends, old and new, here in the audience. For those of you who don't know me, I am not Mike Gonzalez of the Heritage Foundation. Apparently, I'm his doppelganger. That's to be debated. I am, however, also, or have been called Dr. Doom because of my generally pessimistic outlook on all things. And I'll get into this a little bit. But I hasten to add that my so-called apparent pessimism is not pessimism or cynicism, it's realism. I'll explain why in a moment. But we start with the paradox of what we're discussing here in academia, media, and culture, or our cultural institutions, the very things that were set up over centuries as arenas for free exchange of ideas, as sanctuaries, so-called, of open inquiry, they've all pretty much collapsed through a narrowing or closing of the mind, narrowing of intellectual horizons, through ideological capture, through a kind of sophomoric groupthink that then leads to attempts to suppress and then attempts to repress our side of different issues and topics. All right, what evidence do I have? Let's look at each of these fields, academia, media, and culture, very, very briefly. In academia, we all know, I'm not going to go through dozens and dozens of examples, but scholars on both sides of the Atlantic have been silenced, have been fired for speaking about the wrong topics, for expressing the wrong opinions or beliefs on cutting-edge issues like homosexuality and sodomy, for expressing gender-critical views, for doubting that the trans lobby is doing good things to our children. But I'll give you the most recent, incredible, scandalous example of digital erasure. It happened, I think it was November, just a few months ago in Berlin. Some of you may not know, but I think it's Europe's only library of conservatism is in Berlin with 35,000 rare books, volumes, manuscripts. It's incredible. It's a proper research center, despite it being conservative. They're very serious people. Scholars. Well, the GBV, which is the network of libraries in Germany, has removed them entirely from their network. Meaning that if you're a scholar, a doctoral student, a researcher, and you're looking up something on Burke or de Maistre or de Tocqueville, you're not going to find any of their holdings anymore. It's as if they don't exist. It's incredible. I think this is outrageous, and I hope people will write about it and talk about it. I can put you in touch with the curator, the director of the library, if you like. That's the example from academia and the academic world. In the media, well, it's been mentioned now several times, NatCon Brussels in 2024. But I also point to how the media has suppressed or denied certain stories over the years. First with COVID. Remember when people were saying it came from a Chinese laboratory, and New York Times and others refused to cover it, refused to investigate, saying this is nonsense, this is from the extreme right, these are paranoid fantasies. And a year and a half later, New York Times kind of, well, sheepishly admitted, well, yeah, it does appear that it came from a lab. Same thing happened with the Hunter Biden laptop. It didn't exist, there's nothing on it, and then, well, actually, same with crime statistics. Many countries here in Europe will not reveal their aggregated crime statistics because, well, they happen to correlate with the influx of certain immigrant communities into Europe. So all these are examples of the media just preventing the free expression, free exercise of ideas and opinions. And in culture, well, you can point to the statues being pulled down, statues of Columbus and King Leopold II here in Belgium. King Jan Sobieski, the statue of him that was supposed to be erected for the 335th anniversary of the Battle of Kallenberg was blocked and is not erected. I think there's a concrete base, but there's no statue. And that was stopped several years ago. These are Jonathan Swift's yahoos running around the world, acting. It's mankind at its worst, you know, beating us down, preventing us from thinking and expressing different ideas. All right, so not all is bad. There are positive signs. We've heard some examples today. I'm sure we'll hear some this afternoon. There are new schools all the time, new summer schools, very exciting. From our side, too, Christian, Catholic, conservative, schools training young people on how to argue, how to appear in the media, how to develop talking points. There's new film and art being produced of our kind, sympathetic, not antagonistic to Christianity. These are encouraging, certainly, but they're all insufficient. There is, from my point of view, no massive shift in the commanding heights of power yet. There's no tipping point that we've reached where things are changing and the culture is being renewed and saved. There is no reversal of the trends we've been seeing for decades. We've been focusing on ideas, we've been focusing on teaching students, we've been focused on repealing laws. These are great, incremental, necessary steps, but it's not the same as shifting our entire culture. The fact is we are decades behind. We can argue about where the decline started. We're not going to go back to William of Ockham. We're not going to go to the French Revolution. I like May 1968. That's a good starting point when things across the West really began to change. That's when the new left around the world took control of things. And as Harvey Mansfield, who has a new book out there, by the way, said, the poison of this countercultural revolution, which was sexual, which was based on identity, which was against all forms of authority, has worked its way so far, so deeply into our souls and our societies that the effects of that revolution have become less visible to all of us because it's all just part of what we live and breathe every day. We're not even aware of what's happened. So academia, the media, and our cultural institutions are beholden, are in control, are under control of certain groups. And these groups are not necessarily only left-wing people. These areas, these spheres of activity, of human activity, are all dominated by wealthy conglomerates, by billion-dollar endowments, by very powerful elites, by what some people call the Davoisie, the people meeting in Davos every year, just 2 weeks ago. I think we cannot avoid that reality. We have to recognize that. And we know, I don't have to tell you this, the agenda of these powerful metropolitan elites run counter to all our ideas of what is moral and immoral, to all our values, the values of people in this room, and to any coherent and proper understanding of what is the human person. So I don't think we will retake or renew our culture or retake our institutions with a few more summer schools, a few more Substack accounts, more letters to the editor, et cetera. All fine and good, but we need so much more than that. So let me move towards the end of my comments by listing 3 concrete steps, among many others, that we can consider implementing, consider doing, and then I'll finish up with 2 general statements. The 3 concrete suggestions or things I'd like you all to consider in your own countries Defy them being the elites, the progressive elites. Call out their lies in the media and academic world. Make a fuss, make noise. Refuse to self-censor. Publish the unpublishable. Read Jean Raspail in English in front of your teachers. Speak the unspeakable. Talk about abortion and homosexuality and the natural order of things. And if you're really courageous and don't worry about tenure anymore or a proper job, write under your own name, even when the algorithms punish you. Because the more of us that get canceled, we all become part of the great diaspora, and we will help each other. We form a network of those who have been canceled. Second, I tell this to very creative people all the time, produce your own cultural and intellectual products, your own goods. Populate the culture with your own products, writings, books, art, music. Fill the space with our stuff. It doesn't all have to be Andres Serrano's Piss Christ. Remember that? The photograph of the crucifix submerged in a vat of urine, and they put it up and called it art? Let's do the opposite. Promote good art. Populate the world with the good. And third, build parallel institutions. Schools, yes, we need alternative universities, not just Oxford and Cambridge. They're under the control of other people. We need new schools, but we also need new journals. We need new research centers. We need tight-knit samizdat networks. It's very important to create these networks, and this event today is very important. It's one of those things we should do. We need more of these events where we can get to know each other, collaborate, share best business practices, share contacts and resources. And finally, within this third area of recommendations of building parallel institutions, there is this mystical or mysterious world, to me at least, of alternative finance and blockchain. Now, this is Greek to me. I'm still learning about it. But to people here under 30 who know this world, we on the right, we Christians, we who are defending the West's values, need to use this technology. His Excellency Araujo said it this morning. There he is, about using technology. So we need to use alternative finance mechanisms to create new payment processing systems, to create crypto-funded media, to take control of how the money moves and where it is stored. Because you don't want a bank like Chase or JP Morgan canceling your accounts because you're suddenly deemed homophobic. And regarding blockchain, we need to apply it to create anonymous storage systems, to create systems that allow for private transactions and the sharing of information. We need voting mechanisms based on blockchain, and it can also be used for political mobilization so that you can't be surveilled. My closing two statements. For all of this to work, and other things too, we need two other things. First, and this keeps coming up in recent conversations, we on the right, we conservatives, we don't have a theory of power, meaning we're kind of scared of it. We're uncomfortable with the word power and talking about power, but we need to understand it. We need to know how to get it, how to achieve it, and then how to wield it properly. And then more importantly, and this I have to recommend James Davison Hunter, who 16 years ago wrote a book that talks about this. We need a working theory of culture. How does culture work? What is the dynamics of culture? And how do we change culture? It's not just a matter of filling the space with more products and our content and our ideas. It's much more than that. We need to understand how culture is first produced, managed, and then transmitted to other people. And that's linked to the idea of power, of gaining power. We need all this to pour the foundations that we need to create the new sanctuaries of freedom and to create the foundations of a renewed Western culture. And I leave you one final question. With all this in mind, and all this takes years, takes generations, the question we all have to ponder privately is, are we ready to do the difficult, back-breaking, labor-intensive, capital-intensive work now, whose fruits you and I will not see, so that a generation or two or three from now, the culture of the Judeo-Christian West may have been saved? That's the question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mario. And since freedom of expression is so central to our discussion, let us now turn to the academic world and look at what's happening inside our universities. Our next panelist is Fernando Sanchez, president of the Catholic University of Costa Rica. He has served as Costa Rica's ambassador to the Holy See and as a member of the National Parliament, and he holds a PhD in political science from the University of Oxford. As a university president, he focuses on education rooted in values, open dialogue, and the formation of responsible individuals. So, President Sanchez, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Comienzo por agradecerle a Political Network for Values por esta invitación y por dar un espacio a la academia, a la educación superior católica, para que hablemos de este tema tan importante. Debo decir que estuve tentado a concentrarme en el tema de las elecciones de nuestro país del domingo, porque es lo que más me han preguntado, pero como tengo 10 minutos no me da tiempo, así que si tienen alguna duda, con mucho gusto lo hablamos en cualquier momento. La mayoría de los temas que vamos a ver hoy, no sé si me pueden pasar la presentación, por favor, vienen de un texto. Está por ahí el... No, pero ahora se devolvieron. Si me devuelven el... también fui parlamentario, entonces voy a pedir que me devuelvan el tiempo. Gracias. Sí, ya sabes cómo es, ¿no? Vienen de este libro, con mucho gusto, si alguien lo produjimos en nuestra universidad, si alguien lo quiere o tiene interés, con mucho gusto se los puedo facilitar. ¿Qué retos estamos viendo? Y voy rápido porque ya sé que tengo poco tiempo. Lo primero que vimos, el principal problema que estamos teniendo hoy en día, y que dice el World Economic Forum, es que las empresas no están invirtiendo, sobre todo en América Latina, porque hay grandes lagunas en la formación, sobre todo en temas de valores y habilidades blandas. Y eso es cierto para el 60% de los trabajadores, pero para casi el 40% de los líderes que estamos formando nosotros. Y aquí pues se presenta un tema fundamental que tiene que ver con cuáles son los retos de enseñar, aprender en una institución educativa católica en nuestros días, o en una institución educativa en general en nuestros días, y formar ciudadanos integrales, que razonen con rigor, que actúen con responsabilidad, que sirvan a la ciudad, a la comunidad a la que pertenecen y que promuevan un espacio educativo donde estudiantes, docentes y colaboradores crezcan en lo humano, lo intelectual y lo espiritual. Lo básico es un modelo pedagógico humanista, fundamentado en valores, que propicie en los miembros de la comunidad educativa un espíritu de misión, que los convenza de trabajar por el bien común, por cosas que hagan diferencia en cualquier ámbito del quehacer humano. Y esto, en el ambiente que estamos ahora, con cambios veloces, inciertos, globales y en muchos casos efímeros, es un enorme reto, sobre todo con los cambios culturales y los retos culturales ya muy comentados en este día de hoy. La Federación Internacional de Universidades Católicas, la FIUC, hizo una investigación preguntando cuáles eran estos retos, los más importantes que enfrenta hoy el profesional que se gradúa de una institución educativa donde se enseña a partir de valores. Menciono tres rápidamente. El primero nos dice que el 50% de las actividades que se realizan hoy o que se van a realizar en un futuro muy próximo van a ser sustituidas por máquinas o algoritmos. No es la mitad de los trabajos, es la mitad de lo que hace cada uno en sus trabajos. Entonces, ahí tenemos un enorme reto. La mitad de las cosas que se van a hacer en un futuro lo harán máquinas o algoritmos. El segundo reto tiene que ver con cuáles van a ser las habilidades más importantes en el mundo del trabajo, y tienen que ver con habilidades blandas, habilidades globales o destrezas integrales, como quiera llamárselas. Estas van a ser las habilidades más necesarias y mejor valoradas en el mundo del trabajo. Habilidades propias de liderazgo positivo y transformador, como capacidades para resolver conflictos, para comunicarse de manera asertiva, para resolver conflictos, para trabajar en equipo, para poder hablar, discutir, dialogar con la verdad, van a ser esenciales. Y vean qué interesante, una nota al pie de página. Nos dice la investigación, el primer trabajo y el primer ascenso van a depender del título universitario, pero de en adelante todo lo demás van a depender de este tipo de habilidades que tienen que ver con habilidades integrales y con valores. Entonces, vean ustedes lo que nos dice ahorita el Foro Económico Mundial. 6 de cada 10 de las destrezas más importantes en un futuro, en el 2027, tienen que ver con este tipo de habilidades globales o integrales. Y la última, nos dicen que, bueno, que el conocimiento va a cambiar muy rápido, se va a volver obsoleto muy rápido. Y entonces el mayor reto va a ser aprender a aprender de forma veloz, de forma continua. Y para eso se ocupa un valor muy importante, que es la humildad para aprender. La humildad para aprender a aprender constantemente, que es un tema importantísimo. Pero todo esto me lleva al corazón de lo que quería decirles hoy. ¿Cómo logramos enseñar a partir de valores, enseñar a partir de virtudes? ¿Cómo enseñamos a nuestros estudiantes a adaptarse a los cambios que está habiendo si no logramos dialogar, si no saben dialogar o si no se puede dialogar en libertad? Plasmar en la práctica un modelo pedagógico humanista fundamentado en valores que propicien los miembros de nuestra comunidad educativa un espíritu de misión que les permita trabajar por el bien común supone sostener una comunicación asertiva. Y no es posible eso si no se sabe dialogar. Y el diálogo fructuoso va a depender de poder dialogar y comunicarse con libertad. ¿Cómo enseñamos a nuestros muchachos a dialogar, a crecer y prepararse si no pueden hablar con libertad y con la verdad? Hay un texto fabuloso del Papa Francisco, de gratísima memoria, Fratelli Tutti, una de sus últimas encíclicas, que habla mucho sobre este tema. Y nos dice que acercarse, expresarse abiertamente, mirarse, conocerse, tiene que ver con dialogar. Entre la indiferencia egoísta y la protesta violenta hay un punto medio que es el diálogo. Y él plantea 7 recomendaciones para un diálogo fructuoso. La primera, y esto es lo que estamos trabajando durísimo en la universidad para poderlo fomentar, la paciencia y la humildad para poder dialogar y ceder en aquellos puntos importantes. Dice el Santo Padre que el diálogo tiene que verse como un intercambio de ofrendas en favor del bien común, aceptar ceder algo en favor del bien común. No imponer, sino aceptar. Pero hay que tener muy claro qué no se puede ceder y en qué sí se puede ceder. Y ahí tenemos muchísimo que trabajar. Dice él, dice la encíclica, quienes actúen de esta manera serán los héroes del futuro. Comprender que las redes sociales no son monólogos y no sustituyen al diálogo. Primero porque no son confiables y segundo porque se imponen los puntos más altisonantes y violentos. Pero los monólogos no convencen a nadie. Y vean qué interesante, eso que ustedes ven ahí son los sentimientos de soledad en jóvenes en el mundo entero. En todo sube a partir del 2012 los sentimientos de soledad. ¿Qué pasa en el 2010? Facebook incluye el botón de like y Twitter, hoy X, incluye el botón de retweet. Cuando se busca validación en las redes, esto es lo que nos está pasando. Y mucho más que podríamos comentar. 3, evitar los ataques ad hominem, los ataques personales. Lamentablemente hoy es lo que vemos día a día y somos todos de esto, ya lo decía Rodrigo hoy, objeto de este tipo de ataques. Los muchachos tienen que ser enseñados a ser muy fuertes, muy valientes en el argumento, en el fondo, pero suaves y misericordiosos en la forma, no contra la persona. Respetar y valorar las opiniones y las visiones de todas las partes. Cuando tenemos a alguien al frente, hay que enseñarles que no solamente la persona, es su familia, su cultura, su historia. Y hay que respetar diferentes posiciones y exigir el mismo respeto para nuestras posiciones. Respetar y apostar por la multidisciplinariedad, la diversidad de posiciones. La pandemia nos enseñó que ya no hay un problema serio que se puede resolver desde una sola ciencia. Vean qué interesante, recuperar la amabilidad, porque las formas y el tono importa, sobre todo en el caso de los jóvenes. Palabras que acojan, que abracen, palabras de amabilidad. Esto, sobre todo en el debate político, lo hemos perdido muchísimo. Todos conocemos a alguien que nos dice que no de una manera tan bonita que le decimos gracias, o alguien que nos dice que sí de una forma tan fea que más bien nos enoja. El tipo de habilidades para comunicarnos va a ser fundamental a la hora de dialogar. Y lo más importante, comprender que el objetivo último del diálogo es propiciar la paz. Tenemos que formar verdaderos artesanos de paz, que no le teman a la verdad, que sean valientes, pero que sepan y aprendan a dialogar. Y hacerlo en el ambiente donde estamos, donde es muy fácil confundir lo que es cierto de lo que no lo es. Ese es el tipo de habilidades que estamos buscando enseñarle a los muchachos para que salgan Sean valientes, digan lo que tengan que decir, pero que como líderes que son logren cambios reales en la sociedad. Y si no, vean por qué. Este dato es el dato para mí más importante, por lo menos en América Latina. No creo que sea el problema más grande, el problema de corrupción, ni inseguridad, ni la desigualdad, ni el tema económico. Tiene que ver con la confianza interpersonal. Esa es la respuesta a la pregunta, ¿cuánto puedo confiar en el otro? ¿Cuánto puedo confiar en el prójimo? En América Latina, solamente en promedio un 15% de las personas dice que puedo confiar en el otro. A ver, ¿cómo construimos una sociedad más justa, más próspera, un mejor sistema político, económico, social? Que tenemos que enseñarle a nuestros muchachos que van a ser líderes, que van a dirigir nuestros países a hacerlo, si no confiamos en el otro. Es más, se los pongo peor. En este momento, si en América Latina se viviera la parábola de los talentos, menos de 2 personas de cada 10 se hubiera parado a atender al enfermo caído. Eso es lo que nos está diciendo estos datos. ¿Y por qué es esto? Bueno, porque no nos estamos sabiendo comunicar. Fundamental, si queremos cambiar las cosas y que se respete el diálogo, que se respete la verdad, que se respete el derecho a hablar con la verdad, la libertad de expresión, tenemos que aprender a confiar uno en el otro y para eso hay que ser valientes y poderlo hacer y aprender las herramientas necesarias para manejarnos en este ambiente. En eso estamos trabajando desde hace tiempo, porque como bien lo decía James Newbury, en esta pregunta famosa, ¿qué es más importante, el camino o el destino, el proceso o la meta? Lo más importante no es ninguna de las dos, sino la compañía. La compañía. Pero ¿cómo le damos valor a la compañía si no confiamos unos en los otros? ¿Y cómo logramos confiar si no podemos dialogar? ¿Y cómo logramos dialogar si no respetamos la verdad, si no respetamos la libertad de expresión? Ahí tenemos un problema seriosísimo y un trabajo enorme que hacer a nivel de todos y ciertamente de la academia. Finalmente, pues ya lo decía, vivimos en tiempos de cambio, veloces, inciertos, globales y efímeros, donde las máquinas van a hacer la mitad de las cosas que estamos haciendo ahora, donde las habilidades blandas van a ser esenciales y donde hay que aprender constantemente. Si queremos fomentar un modelo pedagógico que trabaje a partir de valores, que haga diferencia, es fundamental que aprendamos a dialogar de manera fructuosa y para hacerlo es fundamental que lo podamos hacer en libertad. Si no, no hay manera de cambiar las cosas y no hay manera de confiar en los demás y no hay manera de crecer como sociedad. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanchez. As our discussion moves across continents, we have already heard European and Latin American perspectives on freedom. With our next speaker, we now travel across the Atlantic to the United States. Our next panelist is Mr. Jay Richards, Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation, trained in philosophy and theology at Princeton University. He brings a uniquely American perspective to the intersection of culture, public policy, media, and freedom. As an author, thinker, and public intellectual, his work focuses on how free societies defend truth, pluralism, and open debate in the midst of intense cultural conflict. So, Mr. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to participate in this conference. And we were actually discussing as panelists whether the title of this session was supposed to have a question mark or not. And I think we sort of answered it. Mario interpreted it the same way I did. Of course, the ideal, at least the sort of Western ideal of culture and of media and of the academy, is that these are protectors or bastions of free speech. And so that might be what we'd expect, all things being equal. The reality, unfortunately, is quite otherwise. I'm interested and surprised by how many people at this conference today have made references to Charlie Kirk, which was an enormous event, of course, in the United States to have someone that was beloved by many conservatives, especially 20-somethings, Gen Zers, to be shot on video for speaking. I mean, quite literally. So it's in many ways the perfect metaphor. Nevertheless, I think at least those of us, let's say in Western Europe, certainly, and in North America, the average American who is having his or her free speech violated is not in a special danger for assassination. I mean, many of us that take risks, I think we sort of imagine, okay, I'm willing to be sacrificed, or I'm willing to sort of sacrifice my life, by which we sort of imagine something like that, right? That, okay, maybe somebody shoots me, there's no pain involved, I'm just gone. Here's the reality, though, is that most of us will not experience so-called red martyrdom. We will experience white martyrdom. We will not be asked literally to give up our lives. We'll be asked to give up our livelihoods or our public reputation or even our sort of entry and acceptance into polite society. And so I think we would do well to steel ourselves and to train ourselves against that likely eventuality and maybe spend less time thinking about literal red martyrdom. And so with that, let me give you two examples of how this played out in recent years in the United States, because I think the sort of answer of, okay, where are the bastions of free speech? Are they in the academy? Are they in the media or culture? Is that it's just nothing like that simple, because the academy, politics, civil society, media, the corporate world, it's never been more true that these entities are in many ways fused. And so you can see this in the United States, in the baking industry or in the pharmaceutical industry, that it's not a simple private industry. It's often almost a cartel with the regulatory state in Washington, D.C. It's exactly the same thing in the U.S. when it comes to censorship. Because we have the First Amendment, it's very difficult for the federal government to literally censor an American citizen. Now, they might do it temporarily, but the court will almost always find in favor of the Americans. So you might think from a European perspective and some of the things that are being debated here that, okay, Americans have much wider opportunities for free speech. That may be true in a sense, but what happens is that the violations of free speech, the censorship and the suppression, they actually come from what appear to be private entities and industry, even if behind it is actually a government actor. And so two very good examples of this. One, the so-called gender ideology controversy as it played out actually in 2022 and 2023 with a Babylon Bee censorship on Twitter. I'm wondering how many people have heard of Babylon Bee. It's a popular conservative satirical website that makes its money basically satirizing local news. And then the second example is how scientists who dissented from the official line during the 2020 COVID lockdowns were treated. So let me tell you briefly about this story. Most of you don't know the Babylon Bee. I'm glad, because then you won't probably have known this story. So in the United States, for sure, we experienced what I'll just call linguistic engineering starting really quite intentionally about 2012 or 2013. In fact, as early as 2013, the Associated Press, so the wire service in the United States, implemented so-called pronoun rules. And the pronoun rules simply meant that when the AP reported a story, they would use the pronouns corresponding to individuals' gender identity rather than that individual's biological sex. So in other words, someone who is a man who has a reproductive system designed around the production of gametes, sperm, that has testes, that has an XY chromosome. If he identifies as a woman, the AP will refer to that person as a she. And so you can imagine sort of how this goes. And so it gets very complicated, right? If you have this old-timey idea that biology is real and that they're actually males and females. But this went on for several years, and it got so extreme that by 2022 or 2023, the Associated Press decided that it would no longer use phrases like biological sex. Instead, it would refer to sex as a sex assigned at birth. So in other words, sex is not a real thing. It's not something that is biological. It's something that's assigned to you. It's a social construct. Now, this is a radical scientific and philosophical program, right, underway with no debate, just simply imposed by a changing of the language and the words that we're allowed to use publicly. Now, you might think, well, that's the Associated Press. That's right, but virtually any other publication that's using the Associated Press is going to want to conform to that. And so that's what happened. And so this language, there was never a vote, there was never a policy, there was never a study that this was a good idea. This is what happened. So then, run that out about a decade. In 2022, USA Today, a large American publication, named the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health, named Rachel Levin, its Woman of the Year. Now, if you look up, some of you are going to Google this, who Rachel Levin is. Rachel Levin was the #2 person at the Health and Human Services and was quite manifestly a man who was presenting as a woman. I'm sorry for the Europeans that may be offending you to speak this way, but that's just right. This is what we all know and we see it. All right, so the Babylon Bee, being a satirical news site, what do you think they did? They named Rachel Levin their man of the year. All right? USA Today won with the year, right? So they're the ones right biologically. Now, what do you think happened? Twitter suspended their account for hate speech. All right? Suspended their account. Now, this was Twitter. This is a private corporation. All right? That's how it worked. So you didn't think, okay, well, that's not censorship. In fact, there were conservatives on social media at the time saying, no, that's not censorship because it's a private company. They can sort of do what they want in this sort of argument. Right? Well, it went on like this, and the Babylon Bee could simply have deleted that tweet. Instead, they left it up, and their CEO, Seth Dillon, said, we're not going to bow the knee to the censors. And so they were willing to leave and abandon about a third of their market share because a lot of their audience came from Twitter, which is now, of course, called X. That was their major market, and yet they were willing to give it up. Right? So that's the first instance. And then I'll just very briefly mention a second instance, the COVID catastrophe of 2020. So most of you will remember, I could describe this in the United States. Almost immediately, people suspected, as Mario mentioned, that this SARS-CoV-2 virus might have come from, who knows, maybe this thing called the Wuhan Institute of Virology right there in Wuhan rather than from a wet market. And what happened is essentially a conspiracy in which the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, or rather the NIH, a man named Francis Collins, and Anthony Fauci, who is a famous man in charge of another federal agency, worked with scientists on a private call. They recognized that the virus looked engineered. And yet they decided there needed to be a paper written in a scientific journal claiming the opposite. And so several of the scientists on that call, which happened in almost exactly 6 years ago, February 1st of 2020, on that call a month later had an opinion piece published in Nature Medicine on the so-called proximal origin of this virus, claiming that there's just no plausible way it could have been engineered. All right? So it's an opinion piece. Nobody seemed to notice that. And these are scientists that admitted it was probably engineered or looked so in private. The media then used that opinion piece by these scientists to just claim that the debate was absolutely over. It was called a sort of right-wing conspiracy to believe that this thing was engineered. And so the discussion was basically suppressed for years, at least in official channels. The same thing happened with the lockdown question. So there was never a debate about the merits of a population-wide lockdown to slow down the spread of a respiratory virus. It was just simply a sort of given that people, I assume, we imagined it had been studied somewhere. In fact, it hadn't. It was a sort of hypothesis. Any scientists that were willing to speak out against this found themselves, if not fired by their institutions, certainly suppressed by social media. And one in particular, a guy named Jay Bhattacharya, who was a scientist, a medical scientist and health economist at Stanford University, published a paper sort of pointing out that the virus probably spread long before we realized that the lockdowns probably wouldn't make sense. In October of that year with some other scientists, he signed a statement called the Great Barrington Declaration, which was simply a statement that said we should pursue targeted lockdowns. So in other words, focused protection on people that are at very high risk from a bad outcome from COVID, and then let the rest of the population go. And for this, again, Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins at the NIH privately conspired to destroy him. They called him in private emails a fringe epidemiologist. This is a full professor at Stanford, all right? Well, so how did these things turn out? There's sort of good news and bad news. One of the signers of the Great Barrington Declaration, a man named Martin Kulldorff, who was at Harvard University, he signed the Great Barrington Declaration. He lost his job from Harvard University. What happened to Jay Bhattacharya? About a year ago, April the 1st of 2025, he was sworn in as the new director of the National Institutes of Health in the United States with a $50 billion budget. In other words, he filled the position that Francis Collins, who tried to destroy him, had filled before. An amazing sort of example of poetic justice, but which very, very rarely happens. Now, there are lots of examples of this. Oh, by the way, what happened to the Babylon Bee? I forgot this is the punchline. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, noticed that the Babylon Bee had been censored and got interested in buying Twitter. In fact, he was joking about it on Twitter, and somebody said, you should just buy it. And he said, how much did it cost? He did it. He actually did it in 2022 for $44 billion. He bought Twitter, now X, and immediately reinstated the Babylon Bee account. So these things, you can see, they can go well, they can go very poorly. But what I think the sort of lesson from both of these is that the indispensable component of both of these events is individuals, in some cases very high-placed individuals at places like Stanford or maybe the richest man in the world, being willing to risk or even destroy their livelihood and their reputation, and to treat these not as things to be grasped at, but as things to be given up, if necessary, in pursuit of the truth. None of these individuals, Jay Bhattacharya, Elon Musk, Babylon Bee, knew how it was going to turn out ahead of time, but they were willing to do that. And that is precisely what we must be willing to do, to give up our livelihoods and our reputations, if necessary, for the pursuit of truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard. And now we return to Europe. Our next speaker is Father Benedict Kiley, founder of Nazarene.org and the priest of the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham in England. Having spent much of his ministry between Europe, the United States, and the Middle East, Father Ben has dedicated his life's work to the aid of and advocacy for persecuted Christians. So, Father Ben, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to my friend Stephen for inviting me. I'm not here just because they needed a Catholic priest off the street or a character from The Matrix. Mainly it's because of my work for persecuted Christians. One of the most embarrassing and pathetic things to witness is a politician or a pundit who is unable, or much more likely due to moral cowardice, unwilling to state a hitherto verifiably true and accepted fact. That, for example, a woman cannot be a man or vice versa, and it's not possible to be a cat just because you say you identify as a cat. It might appear comedic and silly, and on occasion it can be, but in reality the control and the falsification of speech, of words, is now both dangerous and insidious, and increasing rapidly in Europe. The world's press, which usually only takes note of something the Pope says when it's confirming their liberal values, or is rather peculiar or unusual, that was a regular occurrence under the last pontificate, responded with some interest to a line in Pope Leo's address to the diplomatic corps on January the 9th of this new year. After the usual fairly dull catalogue of events and travels of the previous year, the pontiff began to speak of language and its corruption or misuse. The phrase some of the more serious press noticed was his description of the development of Orwellian-style language, which interestingly he noted was a particular phenomenon of the West, something they hardly commented on, but which we, especially at this conference, should note. While it's not unusual to hear that phrase as a criticism of much of the language of the woke culture, a phrase some might argue has been become something of a cliché with overuse, it is, it seems, for the first time that a successor of St. Peter has used the term. At a time when, for example, in the European Union and in Great Britain, governments are attempting to control and curtail free speech at an extreme rate, often, as Pope Leo himself identified, in the absurd context of guaranteeing free speech, a perfect example of Orwellian doublethink, it is refreshing and encouraging to hear the Pope speak clearly on this matter when episcopal leaders in many of our countries are notable by their silence, and we wonder why they're silent. Cowardice or fear, or dare we say sometimes complicity. While the Orwellian phrase was helpful, Pope Leo's words before that were, to my mind, even more important and prophetic. Remember the great words of Monsignor Ronald Knox. He said a prophet is not someone who foretells the future, but is a man or woman who sees the evils of the day with a clear eye. As a good Augustinian, faithful to his master, the Pope really focused on words and their meaning. This is important both ad intra, within the Church, when, for example, the comprehension of the meaning of both theological and ecclesiastical language is limited often to the professional classes in the Church and not the regular faithful. It's also a significant factor which is often overlooked when much is made of the growing numbers visiting churches at Christmas or Easter. What's not reported is how often, if at all, people return, if they don't understand the meaning of the words used. And I'm not, by the way, referring to use of the Latin language. It's with reference to the contemporary use of words and language, the ad extra, and for this conference, that Pope Leo's reflection assumes a prophetic stance and fulfills his teaching office in service of the truth. He said that rediscovering the meaning of words is perhaps one of the primary challenges of our time. When words lose their connection to reality, then reality itself becomes debatable. This is a description of the current state of the West. Opposing Leo, and a worthy descendant of Pontius Pilate, that unfortunate patron of unscrupulous and unfaithful politicians, is one who would find a home in much of academia, politics, and the media. For those of you who don't know your English nursery tales, this is Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty, who you might know from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. There's an English nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. In Alice in Wonderland, sounding remarkably contemporary, Humpty Dumpty said, his words, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." Dumptyism, if I can invent that word, is the reality that Leo warns about, and with a call for words to, his words, express distinct and clear realities unequivocally, calls the church to go into battle against the falsification of reality. We are surrounded by Dumptyism. It's the infection which needs the antidote of truth. We must declare war on Dumptyism. We must go into battle against it, make truth great again, especially those of us who are Christians and conservatives. More important than Orwellian corruption, Pope Leo, with sharp focus, stated that freedom of speech and expression is guaranteed precisely by the certainty of language and the fact that every term is anchored in truth. This is an essential line for us to meditate upon and to become something of a manifesto, a political promise for all seeking or holding office. An anchor holds a ship steady in a storm. It is a guarantee of safety. When we know a word is true, when we know what it means, when we are certain that it cannot be corrupted or falsified, we are anchored both in truth and reality. This primary challenge the Pope addresses is dependent, again, very important that he says it's a primary challenge, and finds its origin, of course, for those of us who are believers, in the Word, the eternal Logos, who became flesh and spoke the word of truth, which he promised would set us free, because he is truth himself. To be anchored in truth is to be anchored in reality. And it's truly a missionary work of the church and the ship of Peter to provide that anchor in a sea of confusion. Václav Havel, speaking of the effects of living under communism, the very birthplace of Solzhenitsyn's conscious lie, wrote that, his words, "People became morally ill because we became used to saying something different from what we thought." Pope Leo's evangelical call for linguistic clarity and reality is to bring healing to that moral illness, now present not in the failed communist states, but the world of the cancellation and shaming of those who speak the truth. This call for the cleansing of language, the burning away of falsehood, and for words to once again be distinctly truthful, might, it appears, be the first sign of the direction of the Leonine pontificate, a pontificate fighting for free speech, and not just for religious freedom. There is no religious freedom, of course, without free speech, as those arrested in the United Kingdom, I'll probably be arrested when I go home, as those arrested in the United Kingdom for their, remember, silent prayer and their thoughts in their head. People are being arrested for silent prayer and thoughts. Christ, said one of the earliest martyrs of the church, St. Ignatius of Antioch, Christ is the mouth which cannot lie. Pope Leo's clear, distinct address is to make the Church the body which cannot lie, and to draw a world enmeshed in unreality, not just of fake news, but fake words, to find the joy and hope and the freedom of speaking and understanding the truth. This is something, my friends, we should all be committed to. Humpty Dumpty must fall off his wall and never be put back together again.
Thank you very much, Father Ben. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a bit short on time, and since we are in Brussels with strict rules, we need to finish in 5 or 6 minutes. Otherwise, they will kindly escort us out. So we will now hear 2 brief comments. Our first speaker is Mr. Bart-Jan Spruit, opinion editor at CNE.news, co-founder of Edmund Burke Foundation, and a professor at the Seminary of the Restored Reformed Church in the Netherlands. And the second comment, so the second speaker is Madame Polonia Castellanos, president of the Christian Lawyers in Spain. So each speaker has strictly 2 minutes, please. Mr. Bart-Jan, please begin.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation. I represent a network of organizations in the Netherlands who work together to defend classical and Christian values and to stop their abolition in numerous laws, especially regarding the so-called LGBTI agenda. And our aim is to create sanctuaries of freedom. I have to skip a lot. I'm sorry. Of course, what we say, what can be said and what not, is determined by natural law. And in this respect, what we see in today's world is an inversion, a world turned upside down. As G.K. Chesterton wrote, we shall soon be in a world in which a man may be held down for saying that 2 and 2 make 4, etc. What we ought to say becomes forbidden, as it is seen as an act of violence, hurting the feelings and identity of a person. I shall briefly mention 2 cases. In the Netherlands, for example, we are on the brink of the introduction of a ban on conversion therapy, which includes a ban on pastoral conversations with young people with gender dysphoria. You're forced to affirm your the confused feelings of these young people, and waiting for healing becomes criminal. Any other advice is regarded as hate speech. But I have another example with a more positive twist. This one is for my friend on my right-hand side. In the Netherlands, politicians have discussed the introduction of a transgender law. Initially, they wanted to pass this law without a debate in Parliament. And later, the mainstream media refused to give a podium to critical voices, denying transgenders their alleged rights by not affirming their feelings and identity. In their view, was a clear example of hate speech. It was offensive and violent. What happened next is that these critical voices, the opponents of this view, turned to public action, reaching out to the common sense of ordinary people, for example, by posting posters in bus shelters. And when the indignation of the common man was raised, the opponents published a pamphlet on a website so that the right arguments became available to everyone. Then the media had to invite them because of all the commotion and consternation. And when the arguments reached the media, politicians started to doubt their previous position and no longer felt free to support the new law. It was not, as until now, not been accepted. So as for sanctuaries, challenge traditional media by activism or create your own media, like CNN News. And state-funded academia is dead. I agree. So in the Netherlands, we have created a new private university, the Pascal Institute, supported by St. John's College in Indianapolis, focusing on great books, which is the best remedy to cure society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. And our last speaker is Madame Castellanos.
Muchísimas gracias. Lo primero, agradecer y dar la enhorabuena a Political Network for Values y muy especialmente a Lola Velarde, porque soy consciente de todos sus desvelos y porque a pesar de todo y de todos los desvelos, cada año, cada cumbre es un nuevo éxito. Y esa es la garantía de que lo está haciendo bien. Y creo firmemente que el año que no pongan a Lola o a Political trabas para una sala, que no le hagan una manifestación en la puerta, o que los periódicos de ultraizquierda no la critiquen, creo que entonces sí que habrá que preocuparse. Hasta entonces yo creo que está haciéndose todo muy bien. Porque en el fondo sabemos que si hacen todo esto es porque no estamos callados, es porque no estamos de brazos cruzados y es porque somos políticamente incorrectos. Y eso significa que nuestra alma no está tranquila. Y es que es imposible que un alma esté tranquila ante la injusticia, ante el ataque a los más indefensos y porque, como decía Santa Juana de Arco, Dios desprecia la tranquilidad de las almas que destinó para la batalla. ¿En España existe libertad de expresión? Por supuesto que existe libertad de expresión, pero para algunos. Por supuesto que existe la libertad de expresión para atacar a los cristianos, para reírse de Jesucristo, para burlarse de la Santísima Virgen Madre de Dios. Por supuesto que existe la libertad de expresión incluso hasta para tapar la corrupción, pero en cambio, en algunos casos, la libertad de expresión está prohibida. Está prohibida si eres heterosexual, si crees en la santidad del matrimonio entre un hombre y una mujer. Está prohibida si eres cristiano o si eres conservador. Está especialmente prohibida para rezar el rosario o para decir que la biología es clara cuando dice que solo hay hombre o mujer. No existe libertad de expresión cuando dices que solo hay un género, que es el género literario, o cuando dices que los padres tenemos derecho a educar a nuestros hijos conforme a nuestras convicciones religiosas, éticas y morales, sin el adoctrinamiento de la ideología woke. Y, por supuesto, que no existe libertad de expresión cuando una persona dice que a un país solo le representa su bandera y no la bandera del lobby LGTBI. Pero les voy a poner un ejemplo, y es del pasado 28 de diciembre de 2024. Ese año yo fui a rezar con un rosario que es una gozada porque es un arma muy poderosa y que de momento pasa todos los controles de seguridad. Entonces yo fui a rezar con un rosario a las puertas de un centro de abortos. En cuanto bajé del taxi, con el rosario de la mano, 5 policías vinieron a cogerme. Me empujaron, me zarandearon, me alejaron a la fuerza, me pidieron mi número de abogada, después me pidieron mi identificación. ¿Por qué? Porque en el fondo querían convertir una oración pacífica en un delito, ¿no? Querían convertir el amor, la oración, querían convertirlo en miedo. Pero yo no me amedrenté. Y al final fui yo la que puse la denuncia contra esos policías y hoy esos policías están imputados por acoso y por abuso de autoridad. Por ser católica y por pertenecer a la Fundación Española de Abogados Cristianos, que defiende la vida desde la concepción hasta su fin natural, la libertad religiosa y la familia, me han acosado, me han amenazado, me han hecho 3 manifestaciones en la puerta de mi despacho. Me han expulsado de un programa que hablaba de la libertad de expresión porque no les estaba gustando lo que decía y hasta un presentador subvencionado por el gobierno de Pedro Sánchez ha difundido mi foto con mi número de teléfono haciendo un llamamiento público para que me llamasen y me insultasen. Pero tengo que decirles que cada golpe recibido ha sido una chispa que enciende más fuego. Porque la persecución no nos destruye, sino que nos forja, nos hace más fuertes y nos acerca a Dios. Pero hoy no vengo aquí a hablarles de miedo, les vengo a hablar de fuerza, les vengo a hablar de valor y les vengo a hablar de coraje. Porque a pesar de que sabemos y somos conscientes en la Fundación de que en España hay una norma no escrita que dice a todos los jueces y tribunales que no admitan nuestros casos, aún así hemos ganado decenas de casos. Hemos ganado y condenado a Plan Parenthood español. Hemos ganado a la patronal del aborto en España. hemos conseguido que se sancionen a 8 centros de abortos en España. Hemos cerrado y clausurado 2 centros de aborto en México. Hemos conseguido eliminar una sanción que se había impuesto por realizar terapias de conversión. Hemos conseguido reintegrar a un profesor de biología que fue suspendido por decir que, según cómo se junten los cromosomas, XX o XY, se nace hombre o se nace mujer y ya está. Hemos repuesto cruces, hemos conseguido condenar a las FEMEN por profanar la Catedral de la Almudena, hemos conseguido que no se destruyesen las cruces, por ejemplo, de Villarrobledo, de Bezas, de Arrecife o de Betxí. Hemos salvado a 4 personas de la eutanasia y hemos conseguido que varios bebés no fuesen abortados, entre ellas una bebé preciosa con síndrome de Down. Porque la verdad siempre prevalece cuando se defiende con coraje y porque aunque la victoria final no está en los tribunales, está en los vientres salvados y en las almas rescatadas. Por eso, en un mundo que pretende silenciar la verdad con leyes injustas, con intimidación y con la cultura de la muerte, lo que quiero decirles hoy aquí es que denunciemos lo injusto, defendamos lo sagrado y nos unamos y nos organizamos internacionalmente para resistir juntos. Porque, como decía Jesucristo y repetía muchísimas veces mi admirado San Juan Pablo II, no tengamos miedo, porque Cristo siempre vence y porque estando con Dios la victoria también es nuestra. Muchísimas gracias.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, freedom does not sustain itself, people do. Thank you for our speakers and thank you all for joining us today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are running behind time. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please be seated. We are running behind time. The next panel turns to countering disguised censorship in international fora. Our panel chair is Grace Melton, member of the Council of Experts of the Political Network for Values and Senior Associate for International Social Issues at the Heritage Foundation Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Human Flourishing. She focuses on life, marriage and family, religious liberty, and human rights relating to UN policies and American foreign policy priorities. Madam Chair, each speaker has a maximum of 8 minutes, and the commentator has a maximum of 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you here today and an honor to chair this panel on counteracting disguised censorship in the international forums. Much of my work focuses on the United Nations and its numerous entities. Those bodies, despite their founding documents and their mission to foster dialogue among sovereign nations, increasingly censor the views and speech of those who defend human dignity and national sovereignty. Powerful states and ideological bureaucrats distort and manipulate language and restrict freedom. Progressive agendas are unilaterally advanced through processes and mechanisms that often appear to be legitimate, but are in fact a radical departure from the original mission of these international institutions. In an address to diplomats last month, the Holy Father, Pope Leo, said, quote, "The right to freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, religious freedom, and even the right to life are being restricted in the name of other so-called new rights, with the result that the very framework of human rights is losing its vitality and creating space for force and oppression. This occurs when each right becomes self-referential, and especially when it becomes disconnected from reality, nature, and truth." Our panel this afternoon will discuss examples of this disguised censorship at the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and here in the European Union. We'll hear first from Sharon Slater, President of Family Watch International, then from Nady Casillas, Vice President of the Global Center for Fundamental Rights, next from Adina Portaru, Senior Counsel for ADF International, and finally we'll end with Gregor Pupnik from the General Director of the European Center for Law and Justice. I'd just like to remind us all we're going to keep ourselves a little shorter than planned, and I'll ask you to kick us off, Sharon.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm excited to hear from each of the panelists today, and I especially like to thank Lola Velarde for her vision, passion, and dedication for making all of this and the many transatlantic summits possible. I hope that my slides will come on because I prepared several for you, and I'm going to talk today about a censorship strategy called jamming. And also at the end, I'm going to present to you two very important, bold initiatives that I'm going to invite all of you to join in on. So what is jamming? Jamming is a censorship strategy where they try to bury your messages. Your messaging doesn't get out because they do a tsunami of messages. They might characterize your work as hate speech or pseudoscience, disinformation, misinformation. They might call you an extremist or a hate group and so forth and so on. They do a tsunami of aligned media attacks and articles. It also can be called the whole of society approach, attacking you, okay? They have consistent labeling and messaging that they parrot amongst multiple entities. Here is the jamming strategy. And they have incestuous linking to each other to give the aura of credibility. Here's one, the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. European Parliament to host summit backed by anti-LGBTQ plus bigoted groups. That's us, okay? Byline Times, European Parliament, experts and lawmakers extremely worried about the influence of anti-gender movements. That's what we are. Here is me on the website of Human Rights Campaign. They villainize, they demonize you. As was said, they want to take away your reputation, right? Have you ever felt like this? Nod your head. All of these entities and many, many more have attacked me personally. I know how it feels. Labeling you, trying to marginalize you. And they even followed me to the Political Network for Values Transatlantic Summit in New York when we were all there, many of you. And it was National Geographic and CNN. As I came out of the conference room, they accosted me with a media ambush saying, "Sharon Slater, there are allegations that Family Watch International is pushing homophobic laws in Africa. How do you respond to this?" they asked me. I answered, "I've not been involved in any of those laws. It's ridiculous, it's absurd, and I have documents to prove this." Well, CNN created a video, and they had my response. But National Geographic, they created a series for their documentary, their docuseries called Traffic Attacking Me and Another Organization. They presented the question and made it look like I didn't answer. They censored my answer and the proof that I had. So now we actually have a basis, because of that and much more, for a potential defamatory lawsuit against Disney, which owns National Geographic. They've been doing this to many organizations, and finally they went a little too far. Here we have the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, talking about as the new global struggle over gender rights and family values, targeting many organizations here, including the Political Network for Values. They produce investigative reports, just piling it on, trying to discredit many of us. This is Rights at Risk from 2017. The working groups that created it included Planned Parenthood, IPAS, sexual rights initiatives, and more. They call us opposition actors. They identified the Holy See, the OIC, WCF, CFAM, Family Watch, World Youth Alliance, and more. They put us on a map as anti-rights actors and showed all the associations, what they thought they did, between all of us. And they said, for example, FWI, that's me, said that UN entities are aggressively promoting broad sexual rights that are harmful, especially for children. I stand by that statement. They criticize us for having key impacts on these human rights system entities all throughout the UN. They said the Political Network of Values' unique value is its facilitation of international collaboration between CSOs, many of you, and parliamentary actors. Then they updated this in 2021, and they had a chart of all the different ways that we anti-rights actors supposedly are infiltrating various parts of the United Nations. They say our goal is to frame rights related to gender, sexuality, and reproduction as new, foreign, coercive, and dangerous. This is very true, isn't it? Okay, here's a report from IPAS that creates the handheld abortion suction kit that's distributed across the world. Anti-rights groups take aim at transnational trade agreement. There you have a chart with Family Watch, Political Network for Values, Christian Council International, trying to show and expose us. Now, what about the money? What is funding all of this? Well, here's just one example of many I could show you that we've researched. This is in Liberia, where they're pushing a radical abortion law. So Sweden, the embassy, funds RFSU, which is a Planned Parenthood member association, which creates puppets, funds all these puppet organizations. I'll call them fake organizations, but they are registered. And they create a whole coalition called Amplifying Rights Network, all calling for this radical abortion law. Thankfully, it was defeated because the majority of people in Liberia don't like this. All you have to do is expose it with a little funding, and it goes away. Here is just some of the groups that were part of that network. Community health care. If you just go to one of their websites, we could do this for many of them, you can see the money behind that are funding all these entities, including the European Europe and the Safe Abortion Fund by Planned Parenthood and many more. AmplifiedChange.org is an example. There are many funds like this. I can tell you this is just one, a fund to break the silence on SRHR. It promotes what's the triple toxic combination, which is abortion, CSE, and LGBT. They're doing it in Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Zambia, and everywhere. They gave 1,386 grants. These are to these puppet organizations to make it appear that people are rising up from the grassroots. And look at their donors. Again, multiple major funds funding this. Another fund to advance the LGBT agenda. The Rapid Response Fund under the guise of preventing AIDS. They gave 15,000 grants to many organizations. And look who's behind it, the Global Fund, the Netherlands, even the World Health Organization funding this, USAID before Trump, okay? This is a presentation that we gave 6 months before he got into office. And you can see each of these lines represents anywhere from $45 million to $250 million grants going to all these entities under the banner of health and resilience. And these all trickled down to the SRHR triple toxic agenda. And many of these entities had sub-grantees that were the same ones that got the large funds themselves. It's fraudulent and it's corruption at its worst. Here's one example, the APHRC in Africa. Just to look at the funding, there's the Children's Fund, the Global Fund, the World Bank, all these different funds, IPAS, Google even, part of this. But where is the Family Fund? Out of all these funds, where is the Family Fund? I'd like to announce the first bold initiative that I invite all of you to join into, which I hope will be a major outcome of this very conference. Let's establish a global family preservation fund. I already have potential matching donors that can match up to $1 million if we can come together on a global family fund that can fund many of the things. This would be donor-owned, family-centered, family-friendly, family-based, utilizing a family impact lens. It would assess all laws, policies, and projects that would be funded for its impact on the family. This is something that needs to be funded by something like the Family Preservation Fund. Do you know that parliamentarians just launched the draft African Charter on Sovereignty and Values, launched by 28 members of parliaments in Africa, and it calls upon the African Union to preserve the institution of the African family, to protect children from harm before as well as after birth, to maintain sovereignty over the African family and religious and cultural values, to protect the African child by protecting the right of parents to protect their own children. It addresses threats from foreign ideologies and conditionalities, etc. And it exposes sexual reproductive health and rights agenda, which mainstreams into Africa through international frameworks to promote abortion, gender ideology, and sexuality education. We need such a fund that's similar to the other funds on the other side. The second bold initiative that I invite all of you to collaborate with and launch here today, and I'd love to talk to you about it, a family life rapid response network of journalists and media all across, that we will have our own conservative media echo chamber. We'll control the narrative. We'll have consistent messaging like, how about instead of sex change operation, how about sex rejecting surgeries? How about instead of reproductive rights, reproductive wrongs? Instead of sexual and gender-based violence, how about violence against women and girls? And of course, sex is always better than gender. Okay, 2 examples of why this is needed. The World Health Organization just yesterday was considering renewing the status of multiple organizations, including these harmful organizations. We all should have been writing articles about it. Did we even know it was even happening? A beautiful opportunity to expose these organizations to what they're really doing. This is one that you still have time for, that we should have sent throughout our networks. And it's a call for governments to give input to the United Nations on the human rights treaty body system. You're going to learn a lot more about that, I know, and how harmful that is. What if you could help write a shadow report and encourage a government, or if you're a government official here, to issue a report on this? Please, let's work together. Let's come together in a global family preservation fund and a family and life rapid response network of journalists that can write and affect and even mobilize youth voices and warriors on social media and so forth, so that together we can all protect the family. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, today I'm going to address on the erosion of freedom of expression. Sorry about this. No. Well, sorry, I have a presentation, but I don't know how to.
Wait, go back.
Should I go back?
It might be after this. You're going backward. Was it not after this?
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to start with the presentation then. As I said, I'm going to present today on the erosion of freedom of expression through no binding international standards created by the international organizations. And when I'm referring to international organizations, I'm going to be referring to the United Nations and to the Organization of American States, which is also an international organization that covers the whole American continent. So these organizations, okay, here it is. So first of all, we have to remember that these organizations, the UN, the OES, were never meant to be supranational organizations. They were created with a very specific mandate and were never meant to become a supranational parliament that will overrule national laws. They were created, as I said, with a very specific mandate that it is contained within the treaties. So when it comes to freedom of expression, we have the international treaties as the Article 19 from the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and we have Article 13 from the American Convention of Human Rights. These treaties are very clear about the protections given for the treaties to the freedom of expression, but are clear not just about the protections, but about also the restrictions. And both treaties stated very clearly that restrictions are going to be allowed only if are provided by law. Unfortunately, what we have seen in the last years is that a group of people that it is unelected members from the UN committees are overruling these binding obligations. So in other words, these binding obligations nowadays have been interpreted or replaced by the opinions of these members of these committees from the UN, which we know as treaty bodies. These treaty bodies were meant to only interpret the treaties, but what they are doing for real is to really create new obligations for countries that countries never agree on. They have been created these no-binding international standards. One of those is the hate speech. So nowadays, we hear hate speech, and we see hate speech all over the legal documents at the UN, at the OES, and I guess that also here at the European Parliament. Even though we hear and we see hate speech all over the places, the UN recognizes that there is no an international definition, is not a universal definition on what hate speech means. Still, and despite that there is no definition, they keep running campaigns, they keep creating resolutions, observations, recommendations, and forcing countries to adopt their national laws and to include and protect the so-called hate speech. Same thing with the Organization of American States. The Organization of American States in the last years have been pushing for a resolution on hate speech. They are calling, within this resolution, they are calling the states to strengthen public policy and to ensure that they are going to prevent hate speech against vulnerable groups and historically discriminated groups that we know which those groups are. Within this resolution, the OES is calling the states also to combat, and they describe or include a different terminology as intolerant, discriminatory speech. We don't know what that means. They introduce also concepts as diversity, that we have to use an inclusive and diverse speech. We don't know what it is, etc. But this terminology is included within the resolutions. And what this means is that they are creating uncertainty on what speech is protected, because we don't even know what is the definition in that regard. The same thing with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is the main body when it comes to the Organization of American States. Through their rapporteur on freedom of expression, in one of their last reports, they have stated that there is a need to strengthen policy, even if that means that going beyond the legal measures. So in other words, it's or standards or opinions, or the opinions of those unelected members of these committees are the ones who are going to rule, and they don't care about treaties anymore. So that is what is happening nowadays. The other standard that they have been promoting is disinformation. Just as hate speech, disinformation, the Human Rights Council has recognized that there is no definition on what disinformation means. Despite of this, they have included this disinformation and using this terminology to combat some discrimination, or to report on some discrimination on gender. When you go through that report and you see what they are saying, they are stating that in many countries they are using disinformation. For instance, in Africa, using protection of the family means disinforming people and attacking women's rights and LGBT rights. In Latin America, for instance, to use the terminology of gender ideology, it is also like disinforming people, and it is attacking women's rights and people who are not conforming with their bodies. In Poland, for instance, through this disinformation, the abortion couldn't exist in Poland. Same thing in Brazil. They said that Jair Bolsonaro was elected as a president despite that he was using anti-rights discourse. And they finally called all the states to adapt their laws to their recommendations of this rapporteur that no one knows who she is, who elected her, or what is she doing. Still, she calls the states to recommend them to adapt their laws and ensure that they are gonna respect gender ideology. No, they don't call it gender ideology, of course. And finally, and very quick, is the other standard or practice, I would say, not a standard, but more like a practice that they are using nowadays is labeling and stigmatization, the labeling and stigmatization of whose who do not agree with them, with their agenda that they promote within this resolution. So if we go, and I won't extend on that because Sharon already covered, if you look into their website, you will see reports, you will see press releases in which they keep calling groups that defend life, family, or freedom of religion as anti-right groups. And we are not allowed to be part of the debate because we are anti-rights. And in the last debates, what they have done is that they have excluded all of groups and, with the excuse that we are attacking the rights of others that are present, that we are using actually hate speech, and that we are disinforming all the international forum, and that's why we cannot be there. So we can continue. I will jump this. But if you just look or do a quick search, you will see all the terminology that they use that within the OES. Just this slide, you will see anti-rights, 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 which is the latest way for them to label us and to avoid that we will be part of that, or that we will have part of that debate. So finally, and just to close, it seems that everything is overwhelming and that we are losing ground. I don't think so. And I think that the best way to recognize that is that they are stating that they are afraid of the work that Sharon or many other organizations that are seated here in this table are doing within this international organization. So I truly believe that the truth is going to come to light, and that we have that we have to speak the truth clearly, boldly, and louder. And as long as we do it, we cannot be silent. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adina Portaru, and I'm an international human rights lawyer and senior counsel for ADF International, which is a legal organization that defends free speech and other fundamental freedoms. With multiple offices around the world, we're active in more than 100 countries, pursuing litigation and legal advocacy. In the next couple of minutes, I'm going to go deeper into the EU's Digital Services Act, or the DSA, a piece of legislation that represents one of the most dangerous threats to freedom of expression online in the Western world today. The DSA is presented as an effort to create a safe environment online. That language sounds reassuring. But when we look beyond the slogans and examine how the DSA actually works, a different picture emerges. In practice, the DSA establishes a far-reaching online censorship regime, not only within the European Union, but with legal consequences that extend far beyond Europe's borders. Let me explain why. At the heart of the DSA is an obligation placed on very large online platforms, such as X, Meta, or Google, to remove what the law calls illegal content. Failure to do so can result in massive fines of up to 6% of the global annual turnover of a company. That can be billions. So we're not speaking about mere small fines, but potentially crippling sums. And this raises a critical question. What exactly is illegal content? Article 3H of the DSA mentions that illegal content is, according to the law, anything that is not in compliance with EU law or the law of any member state, now or at any point in the future. So let me repeat that. Illegal content is anything that is not in compliance with EU law or any law of any member state of the European Union, now or tomorrow or in 1 month or in 1 year. This definition is extraordinarily broad. It creates a lowest common denominator of censorship because it allows the most speech-restrictive laws in any EU member state to be effectively exported outside the European Union. Laws that would otherwise remain national, some of which are deeply hostile to free expression, now become enforceable through a single EU-level regulatory framework. Let's look at Germany, where it is illegal to insult a politician. If a content creator in the US, in Chile, or in Argentina is going to post a satire, a video, a Babylon Bee type of tweet, then that content may be deleted as illegal content in Germany, but not only in Germany, but through the DSA potentially in the whole world. So you'll not be able to see it even though it happens outside the European Union. The problems do not stop here. The DSA also requires platforms to identify and mitigate so-called systemic risks. These include alleged negative effects on civic discourse, electoral processes, public health, and gender-based violence. In parallel, codes of conduct require platforms to address disinformation, abuse of information, information manipulation, a lot of very vague terms that Nadine mentioned before and that are void of legal terms. These are expansive and indeterminate concepts. They lack legal precision and grant regulators enormous discretion. When such vague standards are backed by enormous financial penalties, the result is clear: over-censorship. Companies are given every incentive to remove lawful but controversial speech, and no incentive to keep speech and to protect it. Under the DSA, enforcement power is heavily centralized in the hands of the European Commission. The Commission investigates, prosecutes, adjudicates, and punishes, often with limited judicial oversight at the early stages. In effect, the Commission combines roles that in a constitutional system committed to the rule of law are normally kept separate. We have already seen how this power has been used. The recent fine imposed to X is a clear illustration of how the Commission has positioned itself as the arbiter of truth and acceptable speech. In addition to fines, the Commission can restrict access to a platform within the EU and, in extreme cases, suspend a platform's operation altogether. This is unprecedented power over the digital public square. And to understand what kind of speech is at risk, consider the case of Päivi Räsänen, a Finnish member of the parliament and long-standing client of our organization, ADF International. More than 6 years ago, Päivi posted a Bible verse on social media and peacefully expressed her Christian views. For that, she was prosecuted for alleged hate speech. She was unanimously acquitted at the first 2 courts, but her case is now pending before the Finnish Supreme Court. It has not yet come to an end. And this case demonstrates very clearly something deeply troubling. Even quoting the Bible can be treated as criminal hate speech under certain European laws. And under the DSA framework, such content could be deemed illegal and therefore subject to removal across the entire EU and potentially beyond, even though your national legislation may not prohibit that. This brings us to one of the most dangerous points of the DSA. Platforms face severe penalties if regulators believe they have not done enough to remove content. And at the same time, there is no penalty at all for removing too much speech. So the rational response for companies is obvious. If in doubt, censor. This is not speculative. It is how risk-based regulatory systems work. Over time, lawful expression, as you see in that slide, where somebody posted, "Jesus died to save me," and that was deemed illegal content. Over time, lawful expression, especially speech that is controversial, religious, political, or just unpopular, will be quietly suppressed, not because it is illegal, but because it is too risky. Although the DSA is an EU regulation, its impact is global. Online platforms operate across borders. Regulators increasingly pressure companies to apply DSA-compliant content moderation policies worldwide, rather than maintaining different standards for different regions. There is also real risk that EU regulators could demand a global takedown of content, not merely its removal in the EU. So this is not merely an EU law. The EU is pulling down a digital curtain, and it is important to stop, reflect, and amend that process. These concerns are not hypothetical. Digital platforms such as X and Meta and Google have warned publicly that the DSA threatens free expression on a global scale. The United States ambassador to the EU, together with European NGOs, have likewise expressed concern about the impact of the DSA on free speech. And in last October, more than 100 free speech experts, academics, lawyers, and many politicians that have been gathering today as well, signed a letter organized by ADF International and sent to the European Commission. The letter warned of the DSA's serious implications for freedom of expression and urged the Commission to consult free speech experts as part of the formal review process. That review to take place in November of last year, and unfortunately the European Commission completely ignored these concerns, and by doing so it missed a crucial opportunity to correct course and ensure that the DSA complies with freedom of expression. The second review is due to take place in 2027 and will specifically focus on free speech. So I would encourage all of you who have expressed well-founded concerns today regarding the DSA and free expression to participate in this review and also to inform our organization of free speech cases that may happen in your countries. And in closing, the DSA is not an isolated measure. It is part of a broader trend across the West where those in power seek to control online discourse in the name of safety, democracy, and integrity. But history shows us clearly that when you give people the authority to assess and limit viewpoints, this ends up in disfavoring speech and dissent. Free speech is not a privilege granted by regulators. It is a fundamental right. It is protected in the highest international treaties. Citizen speech should not be treated as risks to be mitigated, but as fundamental freedom to be cherished. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. French, je vais parler français. On nous a demandé de présenter le sujet suivant, comment répondre aux atteintes à la liberté d'expression dans les instances internationales. Il est extrêmement important que nous ayons cette réunion ici aujourd'hui au Parlement européen quand on voit le risque réel d'atteinte à la liberté d'expression croissant en Europe et la machinerie bureaucratique qui est créée actuellement pour contrôler la liberté d'expression sur Internet. C'est donc pour nous, conservateurs, une exigence vitale d'être conscients du risque réel, majeur, qui porte sur notre liberté d'expression. Nous allons faire un tout petit peu d'histoire. Première question, la construction européenne, ici. La construction européenne, vous le savez, a été construite après la guerre, la Seconde Guerre mondiale, avec une vision politique largement supranationale, une vision politique que les peuples ont dû suivre largement. Je dirais que pendant toute la seconde moitié du XXe siècle, les peuples européens ont accompagné le mouvement, mais n'ont pas nécessairement voulu ce mouvement, ne l'ont pas non plus nécessairement compris. Il y a dans la construction européenne, dès l'origine, un fossé entre le projet européen et la population. Ce fossé, ma génération, nous l'avons vécu. Nous n'avions pas, dans ma jeunesse, la liberté vraiment d'expression. Nous n'avions pas la liberté vraiment de penser, La pensée conservatrice, la pensée critique était extrêmement minoritaire et n'avait pas accès aux médias. Les médias étaient généralement financés par l'État, subventionnés, et les voix critiques étaient extrêmement faibles. C'est grâce à Internet que la liberté d'expression a retrouvé de la place dans nos vies. C'est grâce à Internet que nous avons réussi à communiquer entre nous, que nous avons réussi à retrouver le contact avec la population. C'est grâce à Internet que nous pouvons expliquer ce qui se passe ici à Bruxelles. Internet a rendu la liberté d'expression, au moins en partie. Et en nous rendant la liberté d'expression, a rendu une partie de la liberté politique. Internet est donc essentiel pour assurer et contribuer à la liberté politique. Internet a brisé l'oligarchie de la presse. Et nous, conservateurs, nous bénéficions de la liberté d'Internet. Si le mouvement conservateur a tellement pris d'ampleur, c'est très largement grâce à la liberté que nous donne Internet. Et donc cette liberté, évidemment, est une menace. Cette liberté est une menace si on souhaite conserver le système tel que hérité depuis la seconde moitié du XXe siècle. Si je me mets à la place d'une personne qui est satisfaite du système politique européen, qui est satisfaite des valeurs universalistes et progressistes, je comprends très bien que sa volonté soit de réglementer. Le réflexe de l'Union européenne est de toujours réglementer. L'Union européenne voit la réalité sous l'angle de la réglementation. Nous produisons des normes, nous imposons des amendes, pendant que d'autres produisent des entreprises. Et donc nous, conservateurs, aujourd'hui, nous sommes à ce moment de rupture où le pouvoir, comme nous le savons, est proche, est déjà atteint, mais en même temps, il y a une tentative de censure préventive. Et nous devons prendre conscience de ce qu'a dit Adina. C'est extrêmement sérieux. Le système de censure préventive mis en place avec le DSA et avec le bouclier démocratique est extrêmement sérieux, extrêmement grave. Nous en avons fait l'expérience déjà récemment avec ce qui s'est passé en Roumanie. Personne n'a parlé encore de M. Georgescu. M. Georgescu, son élection a été annulée au prétexte de violation du DSA. Nous sommes aussi dans un processus de perte de l'anonymat sur Internet. Au-delà du DSA, et ça doit nous interroger sur la mentalité qui règne ici à Bruxelles en matière de liberté d'expression. Vous avez certainement entendu parler de ces deux citoyens européens, suisses et français, Xavier Moreau et Jacques Beau, qui ont fait l'objet de sanctions de l'Union européenne en raison de leurs opinions favorables à la Russie. Un officier français, un officier suisse ont fait l'objet de sanctions internationales. Ça veut dire quoi? Sans procès, sans aucune possibilité de se défendre, ils ont été condamnés au gel de l'ensemble de leurs ressources, fermeture des comptes en banque, impossibilité de dépenser de l'argent, d'acheter, interdiction pour quiconque de leur donner même à manger. Ces personnes vivent en Europe. Ces personnes, sans aucun procès, ont été réduites au silence en raison de leurs opinions, alors même que leurs opinions ne sont pas illégales. Même pendant la guerre froide, en France, on laissait les journaux communistes s'exprimer publiquement, même s'ils racontaient n'importe quoi. Donc, voyons le niveau de conflictualité dans lequel se place la Commission européenne en matière de liberté d'expression. Ce qui a été fait à ces deux personnes est extrêmement grave. Alors, comment réagir? Je pense que nous devons penser, bien sûr, en termes de droit, nous devons agir en justice. Mais il est essentiel que nous ayons un regard, non pas seulement sur le fonctionnement interne du système, mais sur le système lui-même. Nous devons travailler, comme le disait tout à l'heure Sharon, sur les institutions. Et non pas seulement chercher à se débattre avec les règles. Les institutions ont une vision politique. Les institutions ont une ADN. Les institutions ont un projet. Et la vision conservatrice n'est pas dans ce projet. La vision patriotique n'est pas dans ce projet. Et donc, nous pouvons travailler au niveau des lois, au niveau de l'application, mais nous devons comprendre plus généralement le système. Et donc, nous, à l'ECLJ, au Centre européen pour le droit et la justice, nous avons participé à 80 affaires à la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. Mais notre plus grand succès, ça a été de réussir à rendre publics les conflits d'intérêts majeurs qui existent entre un grand nombre de juges de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme et des ONG libérales telles que l'Open Society de George Soros, grâce à un rapport qui a étudié de façon structurelle l'institution. Nous avons pu montrer les liens étroits, le fait qu'un cinquième des juges de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme sont d'anciens salariés, membres de conseils d'administration d'organisations de M. Soros ou d'organisations financées par M. Soros. Grâce à ce travail et à la révélation des conflits d'intérêts qui ont été causés par ces liens, le système de la Cour a été en partie réformé. La Cour a elle-même adopté un processus de réforme interne de son règlement. Mais de façon plus importante encore, depuis que nous avons publié ce rapport, aucun juge nouveau, issu de ces réseaux d'influence, n'a été nommé à la Cour de Strasbourg. Et il y a donc une influence, un travail, je veux dire, structurel sur les institutions. Donc ma recommandation, c'est oui, il faut regarder comment les lois sont adoptées, quel est le contenu des normes, mais nous devons avoir un regard critique, structurel et historique sur les institutions européennes et internationales si nous voulons préserver notre liberté.
Okay. Thank you all for those insightful comments. We have, I think, one brief comment in response from Jen Chang Nakasaki from the Population Research Institute.
Muy buenas tardes con todos. Yo voy a hablar en español en este caso. Y hoy, en principio, les traigo una pregunta muy sencilla, ¿no? ¿Cómo es que la industria del aborto nos ataca la libertad de expresión, ¿no? Pareciera que no tuvieran relación alguna. Sin embargo, cuando nosotros escuchamos My Voice, My Choice, ¿en quién pensamos realmente? ¿Una ciudadanía espontánea y transparente? Yo creo que no. Desde el Population Research Institute creemos de que hablamos de una arquitectura transnacional de alta influencia. Porque conviene decirlo con precisión. No estamos ante un simple eslogan. No estamos ante un pequeño grupo opositor, sino todo lo contrario. Estamos frente a una plataforma organizada que funciona como un hub europeo para articular y escalar la agenda abortista. En otras palabras, estamos ante un cambio de paradigma en la forma en la que se ejerce el poder de esta agenda. Ya no basta con mirar las campañas, hay que mirar la infraestructura de la red. Durante décadas, el lobby abortista se analizaba como un esquema lineal. Una organización, un líder, se podía entender cuál era el actor principal. La ya conocida IPPF, USAID, la misma ONU, etc. Hoy en día ese enfoque es completamente insuficiente. El poder ya no se despliega como una pirámide, sino que se despliega como un sistema descentralizado, flexible e interconectado, con la capacidad de adaptarse, reorganizarse y mutar según la coyuntura. Y aquí está la clave. Un network abortista no es un grupo de ONGs con ideas parecidas. Un network es una red de poder transnacional, con estrategias propias, diferenciadas y funciones complementarias. Opera simultáneamente en el plano cultural, político, legal, mediático y financiero, con un objetivo muy concreto: legitimidad técnica, generar presión política y sostener o expandir, incluso en algunos casos, la ejecución práctica. Cuando entendemos estos, dejamos de buscar al culpable único y empezamos a mirar lo que de verdad importa. Nodos, dependencias críticas, puntos de presión, como pueden ser el caso del Parlamento Europeo, como puede ser el caso de My Voice, My Choice. Porque hay algo que también queremos traer a este debate y que no queremos que se nos deje pasar, que es que este paradigma de las redes ha ingresado en el ámbito mediático y, por tanto, ha quitado el estigma negativo de la palabra aborto. Nosotros, desde el Population Research Institute, venimos estudiando los networks abortistas desde hace 2 años en Iberoamérica y hemos documentado casos como el de Figo, Clacay y Family Planning 2030, que operan con el mismo patrón de combinar influencia cultural, ingeniería legal y capacidad práctica en muchos contextos, inclusive en algunos casos estando al margen de las legislaciones nacionales. Quiero terminar con un par de ideas muy concretas y, en principio, invitarles a descargar cada uno de nuestros informes que los pueden encontrar en los siguientes QRs. Y es que estos informes no es lo que nosotros opinamos sobre ellos, sino es lo que ellos dicen de sí mismos. Ya no se escandalizan por esconder que promocionan el aborto por mifepristona, mifeprostol. Todo lo contrario. A raíz de que nosotros hemos alzado la voz y estamos hoy en eventos como este, que buscan cancelar de manera activa, como pudo haber sido en la mañana nuestros actores de My Voice, My Choice, es que esta información que antes publicaban cada día está más escasa y es más difícil de obtener. Desde el Population Research Institute, nosotros estamos comprometidos en seguir alzando la voz para poder dar la batalla cultural y poder seguir avanzando en este debate. Muchas gracias.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly be beginning the final segment of today's program. We invite you to remain seated, and if you're not seated, to take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly be beginning the final segment of today's program. As you come in, please take a seat. Estamos a punto de empezar el último segmento de esta cumbre. Rogamos los que vayan entrando tomen asiento. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be shortly beginning. Please take a seat. Perfecto. No, ya pasado. No, ya pero para que lo sepas. Venga. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we have the great honor of welcoming the former president of the Political Network for Values and the man who has been elected to the presidency of the Republic of Chile with the highest number of votes cast in the history of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, the president-elect of the Republic of Chile. We now open the final remarks of the 7th Transatlantic Summit of the Political Network for Values.
Very nice to meet you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the final remarks of the 7th Transatlantic Summit of the Political Network for Values under the banner of a Transatlantic Alliance for Freedom. We will be hearing from leading members of the European Parliament, the President of the Party of the European Conservatives and Reformists, the President of the Party of Patriots for Europe, and the President-elect of the Republic of Chile, together with the current president of the Political Network for Values, followed by the young leaders of the Political Network for Values. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Kinga Gál is a member of the European Parliament since 2004 and first vice president of the Group of Patriots for Europe, representing the citizens of Hungary. Ms. Gál is the vice president of Fidesz.
Thank you. President-elect Kast, President Morawiecki, President Abascal, dear friends, it's an honor to stay here today with such a distinguished leaders and to be surrounded by so many friends from all over the world. Welcome. I don't know why is it not on. Now? Maybe somebody can help me? It's better? Okay, maybe it's just it has to be closer. So let me begin congratulating my dear friend José Antonio Kast on his historic victory. Your victory is an important victory of common sense for patriots and conservatives worldwide, and above all, for the Chilean people. I am certain that you will accomplish great things as president, and I wish you every success, dear José Antonio. Another longtime friend, Mr. Santiago Abascal, is someone with whom we work closely, both through Vox-Fidesz cooperation and in the leadership of the Patriots Party. He is leading the combat against the woke, left-wing government and the fight against illegal migration for the Reconquista. He represents great hope for Spain. It is no coincidence that Vox is getting stronger. We hope you will be in government soon. We European patriots support you, Santiago. And last but not least, we have with us Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, another old friend. As the saying goes, Poland and Hungary, two good friends. Today, the Tusk government is trampling the rule of law and taking political revenge on conservative opponents. Hungary stands with Poland as we have always supported each other, no matter how some try to undermine it. Our alliance cannot be broken. And this is equally true on the level of the European parties and between our groups in the European Parliament. You are a key ally in our fight, Mateusz. I would also like to say a special thanks to my dear colleague, Mr. Steven Bartulica, President of the Political Network for Values. It is symbolically important what you did today for our common cause, and also the tireless engine and soul of the network, Mrs. Lola Velarde. Thank you for organizing this summit, for bringing us together once again. Great job. It is great to see you, so many here from all over the world, united in purpose and spirit. We all stand for protecting our traditions and defending our values. Representing traditional values in West today is not an easy task. I have experienced this firsthand in the European Parliament over the past 20 years. This is why being here today makes a real mark that shows the world our commitment protecting freedom of speech and our fundamental freedoms is mostly important. In this regard, protecting values, the Political Network for Values has always played a leading role. After successful meetings in New York and Madrid, we are yet again sending strong and powerful messages. And that is why it shouldn't be and shouldn't come by surprise that we are under attack already for organizing this event in the European Parliament. The event was officially denounced even before it took place. Then this morning, a whole group of activists tried to disturb us. This shows clearly that freedom of speech is in danger. We are under pressure by forces who want to silence us, eliminate our roots, traditions, values. Our opponents use every tool at its disposal, rules, regulations, mechanisms, to censor and silence patriotic and conservative voices. So that is why I believe that this summit could not be more timely. Let me recall that here in Brussels, not too long ago, and not far from here, this place, even the police was sent against us. They tried to shut down the NetCon conference by force simply because patriotic and conservative representatives were the speakers. I remember standing on the stage when the police locked down the doors. I felt like in communist times. We Hungarians know these scenes too well. It was shocking that this could happen in our days in Brussels, the so-called capital of European democracy. Just last week, though, and it's important, the court ruled with a precedent-setting judgment that freedom of assembly cannot be restricted on ideological grounds. This is a victory for all of us. The battle for the soul of Europe is underway. And in this battle, we patriots and conservatives stand on the same side. We do not agree on everything, and this is normal. But what unites us is far greater than what separates us. This is exactly why they fear us and try to divide us, because they know that when we stand together, we are stronger. Our voice is stronger. Our influence is stronger day by day. Dear friends, we want to protect real freedoms, fundamental rights, human dignity. We reject any attempt to limit or redefine these freedoms. But it is not enough to reject enforced ideologies being imposed on us. We must strengthen the voice of common sense, new weight in political debates and decision-making. I believe that the formation of the Patriots Group and the Patriots Party was a huge step in this regard. Our aim is to bring change and restore common sense in European politics. A new approach is needed, an intellectual refresh. The desperate attempts of the left liberal forces to silence us only show they fear us. They lecture others on democracy, preach about freedom of speech and freedom of media, but in fact they are the ones who cannot stand any opinion different from theirs and want to limit our freedoms in the name of political correctness. What a hypocrisy. We are and will be under constant attack. If they cannot win over patriot politicians in elections, they try to use the judiciary to exclude us from politics. Or we see it here in the European Parliament, where they try to exclude us from European cooperation. This is a political attack on democracy and pluralism itself. We Hungarians have been putting up with this constant pressure for more than 15 years now, because we say no to the Brussels diktats. We support peace instead of war, common sense instead of woke ideology, families instead of mass migration, by implementing the most comprehensive family support system. This is why they attack us, Hungarians. This is why they attack us, patriots. But they will not silence tens of millions of Europeans whom we represent. Dear friends, thankfully, as this summit shows, we have many allies and friends across the world who share a common mission. And this is why gatherings like this, that bring together like-minded right-wing Christian decision-makers, are so important. We have the duty to preserve and foster those never-failing values and to transmit these to our children's generation. As a matter of fact, I'm personally committed to this cause. The majority of the people are with us. And if so many are with us, then God is also with us. This gives us optimism and strength. As Vice President of Fidesz and the Patriots, I can assure you that we will keep fighting for these values and do our utmost to make our cause prevail. May God bless us all and provide each of us the daily courage to stand strong and to keep fighting the battles, even in the face of constant headwinds. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mr. Morawiecki, banker, politician, and from 2017 to 2013, Prime Minister of Poland. He is the president of the Party of European Conservatives and Reformists and a member of the Law and Justice Party. Previously, he was CEO of Bank Zachodni, WBK, now part of Santander Bank, Polska. Mr. Morawiecki.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear friends, Santiago, Kinga, Stefan, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to here. Well, like I was thinking how to start, and I think that to defend the freedom of speech, which was born in Western civilization and was based on Christian rules, we first have to defend the free world, and we have to be able to defend the West as such. And it is in that context that I would like to present a concept of economic NATO in front of you. And this is very timely because we are in the middle of a very thorny discussion between the United States and the European Union. And even today I had many interviews and I was asked many times, how come I can present a platform of collaboration if we are so much falling apart from each other, the United States and the European Union? And I'm replying to this that this is exactly the moment where we have to find some common denominator for all of us, and the economic NATO can be one, can be such. And this concept is about building free trade zone between the United States, Canada on the one side of the Atlantic, and the European Union on the other side. Free trade zone of such a magnitude could form a formidable alliance across the globe. We could present together somehow close to 50% of the global GDP in nominal terms, in dollars. It means that together we could impose standards and norms and regulations, of course, together with our Chilean friends, that's quite clear to me, on some other jurisdictions. And in looking at the world around us, it is quite obvious to all of us that there is no free speech in China or in Russia. And this Chinese-Russian tandem works against the West, basically. And in this conflict, or maybe even incoming war, I hope it will stay on the level of conflict. Trade wars are class wars, as the classics say. We have to stick together. We have to work and collaborate very strongly together. And how to do this in times when the European Union is falling apart, is torn apart by different concepts, by the European Commission imposing new regulations, when one report after another regarding entrepreneurs is indicating that there is a maze of denser and denser red tape imposed on small and mid-sized entrepreneurs and on the European business. How to do this? And one other concept which I would like to present is the concept of the Europe or the European Union of strategic alliances. And by this I mean we should make one step backwards to the moment when the European Union was successful. When was this? This was at the time of the European Economic Community, till 1993. The four freedoms, movements of goods, services, capital and people, plus competition law. The European Economic Community was a success story. But the moment the European Commission started to superimpose new areas on all the member states, it was the moment when the European Union started to fall into insignificance. And it's much better to make this step back to the level of four freedoms and to enable to agree on Europe of strategic alliances, which means that if some countries have vested interest in harmonizing their policies around this or that topic, this or that area, let them do this. I can give you a couple of examples. Like the countries of eastern flank of NATO have a vested interest in fending off Russia. So we want to collaborate with each other very, very closely. But it's not very strange to me that my Spanish friends or Portuguese friends are not so much interested in spending more and more billions of euros on defending eastern flank of NATO. It's a vital interest of Poland, Finland, Sweden, the Czech Republic, Romania, in future Ukraine, and Turkey as well. This is why I said about the economic NATO. Turkey is part of NATO. We could unite, we could find a common denominator and a better platform for economic and trade collaboration. And this is a positive example, Europe of strategic alliances, the European Union of strategic partnerships. I can give you a negative one, the Migration Pact. There are some countries, in particular our Western neighbors, Germany, which started this Willkommenskultur. Wir schaffen das. Come to Germany. And through this, come to the rest of Europe. But we don't want it in Poland. And during the time when I was Prime Minister, we have not allowed illegal migrants to be transported into Poland, to be pushed through Lukashenko and Putin through eastern Polish-Belarusian border. And we have been able to defend Poland vis-à-vis the illegal migration, which is not the case in the other countries of the European Union. But if there are some other countries, like, let's say, Germany, I don't want to pinpoint and to pick any other member state, but I can imagine that for some countries, this policy of being very open for illegal migrants can be acceptable. Let them make this experiment. This is at their peril, at their risk. I don't want to make this experiment on Poland, based on Poland. And many other member states don't want it either. This is why we should not be forced by the European Commission to take this one-size-fits-all approach from the central bureaucratic institutions coming out of Brussels. We should be able and capable of forming alliances on those matters, by the way, based on subsidiarity clause and proportionality clause. We should be able to form those alliances in the areas which are so important for the rest, for this group, for this or that group of the member states in each particular matter. And this is why both concepts are based on common sense. And we, the Republicans, we, the Conservatives, the patriots of Europe, my political camp, the European Conservatives and Reformists, we are proposing solutions which are based on common sense. We don't want ideological experiments, leftist, liberal, censorship. Like my successor, the current Prime Minister, was able to force through the Parliament new legislation which is basically a censorship on social media. His two officials would be in a position to eliminate any post on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so on, if not veto by Karol Nawrocki, the President of the Republic of Poland. We were that close to censorship in Poland, which I remember from the 80s when I was young, solidarity fighter for freedom and for independence of Poland. So let's base our strategy on common sense. Let's base our strategy on the economic NATO, on the Europe of strategic alliances, and on friendship with great guys like Kinga, like Santiago, like our honorable guest from Chile, the new president-elect, and all people of common sense and goodwill across the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Santiago Abascal, un hombre profundamente enamorado de su patria, España, de su Estado de Derecho y de los derechos y libertades fundamentales de sus ciudadanos. Presidente del partido The Patriots for Europe, presidente del partido Vox, presidente de la Fundación Disenso y miembro del Congreso de los Diputados de España. Señor Abascal.
Muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes y muchas gracias a todos por su presencia. En primer lugar, quería agradecer la oportunidad que me da la Red Política por los Valores y a su presidente Steven Bartulica especialmente, y a nuestra amiga Lola Velarde por esta organización, y además que me dé esta oportunidad en la incomparable compañía de un amigo que acaba de tener tanto éxito obteniendo la presidencia de Chile, nuestro amigo José Antonio Cast, pero también con la secretaria general de Patriots, Kinga Gál, y nuestro amigo Mateusz Morawiecki. Creo que es muy significativo que hoy aquí estén los presidentes de dos de los partidos más importantes de Europa, el Partido de los Patriotas y el Partido de los Conservadores y Reformistas, porque lo que está en juego, la libertad de expresión, tiene que ver no solo con el corazón de la dignidad humana que ha caracterizado a la sociedad occidental, sino con lo más importante de nuestras tradiciones culturales, políticas y religiosas. La libertad de expresión está estrechamente ligada a lo que somos, al derecho romano, al pensamiento griego y a la espiritualidad cristiana. No se comprende Occidente y no se comprende Europa sin la libertad de expresión. Dábamos por hecho que la libertad de expresión estaba perseguida y anulada en China, en Corea del Norte y en Venezuela, pero no nos dimos cuenta de cómo estaban arrebatándonos poco a poco la libertad de expresión en el corazón de Occidente, en Europa, cómo desaparecía y era perseguida también en Estados Unidos. Y nuestras sociedades y nuestras naciones no están condenadas por ningún tipo de determinismo histórico a ir perdiendo la libertad. Si fuese por un determinismo histórico, estamos no solo condenados, sino obligados a la defensa de la libertad. Decía que no están condenadas porque vemos tiranos que van cayendo y vemos también cómo los socialistas y los globalistas empiezan a perder posiciones en muchos foros internacionales donde sus posiciones eran las únicas que se defendían. De hecho, era una sola posición, no había discrepancia. Hoy vemos en foros internacionales como el de Davos cómo se empiezan a hacer planteamientos políticos diferentes por parte de líderes internacionales, pues que no gustarán a todo el mundo, pero que desde luego están garantizando que en esos foros internacionales se produzca un debate que hasta ahora era imposible. Y estoy pensando en el presidente Donald Trump y en el presidente Javier Milei, entre otros, que están garantizando esa defensa de principios que caracterizan a la sociedad. Esta pérdida y este ataque a la libertad de expresión en Europa especialmente nos ha valido la crítica o la amonestación de nuestros aliados norteamericanos en un discurso en Múnich del vicepresidente de los Estados Unidos, J.D. Vance, que compartimos muchos europeos, porque señaló lo que las élites europeas están queriendo ocultar. Yo creo que a pesar de esta persecución, la libertad de expresión se va a abrir paso. Estábamos peor hace 5 años. Javier Milei estaba en la oposición con un 1% del voto. Giorgia Meloni también estaba en la oposición con intenciones de voto pequeñas. José Antonio Cast, por aquellos años, también debía tener un 2% de intención de voto. En Estados Unidos gobernaba Biden y se habían encargado de perseguir la libertad de expresión en las redes sociales. Incluso había multimillonarios que obedecían para perseguir a las personas que defendían nuestros valores. Es verdad que había algunos lugares donde estaban mejor. Mateusz Morawiecki era el primer ministro de Polonia, pero bueno, yo creo que reconquistaremos también esas posiciones. Hasta ahora les bastaba la demonización. Cuando uno hablaba de la defensa de las fronteras, inmediatamente le llamaban xenófobo. Cuando uno defendía la familia y se oponía a la imposición de esa ideología liberticida, la ideología de género, directamente le podían llamar homófobo, le podían llamar transfobo o cualquier otro tipo de cosa. Por supuesto, nos han llamado ultras, fascistas y nazis y nos han puesto etiquetas con las que no nos identificamos y que desde luego no nos definen. Pero yo me quiero acordar de las palabras de un mártir de la libertad, de Charlie Kirk, cuando decía: no nos matan por ser fascistas, sino que nos llaman fascistas para poder matarnos, o al menos para lograr que nos callemos, para cancelarnos. Decía que ya no les basta, porque estamos avanzando, no les basta con la demonización, sino que necesitan la censura. La censura se está imponiendo en muchos lugares porque estamos ante un ataque sistemático a escala global. En España, nuestras posiciones sufren un veto total en los medios de comunicación. En las tertulias políticas, nadie defiende la posición del tercer partido político de España, que representa a millones de españoles. Y lo único que vemos es una demonización, una ridiculización o un silenciamiento de nuestras posiciones. En Francia cerraron el canal más importante de la TDT por defender o por dar voz a Marine Le Pen. No se puede decir nada bueno de la oposición en la Francia de Macron, donde es legal quemar coches, pero decir algo bueno de la oposición parece que está prohibido. Y hoy mismo hemos visto cómo quieren sentar en el banquillo al dueño de la red social X porque ha permitido la libertad de expresión que entonces estaba perseguida. En Polonia, el actual primer ministro Donald Tusk, nada más llegar al poder, asaltó la televisión con la policía. Nada más llegar al poder, y eso pareció bien a todas las élites de Bruselas. Y en el Reino Unido el Parlamento se negó a investigar las violaciones sistemáticas de islamistas a muchas niñas. En Italia, tanto Giorgia Meloni como Salvini han sido perseguidos judicialmente por defender sus fronteras y, por supuesto, Viktor Orbán ha sido multada Hungría porque su gobierno defiende a los húngaros, protegiendo las fronteras y protege la inocencia de los niños en las escuelas, diciendo que son los padres los que tienen el derecho a educar a sus hijos. Y eso es algo que no pueden permitir las élites que han dominado Bruselas hasta ahora. Pero la grieta en el muro es cada vez más grande. Son muchas personas, son millones de personas en todo el mundo y en Europa las que ya se informan por canales alternativos, por las redes sociales. Y por eso, precisamente, están intentando cancelar ese espacio de libertad de expresión. Aún recordamos al comisario Thierry Breton cuando intentó, en el más espantoso, ridículo, perseguir la entrevista entre Elon Musk y Donald Trump. Hoy, Thierry Breton no puede entrar en Estados Unidos porque es un país que quiere defender la libertad de expresión. Y yo creo que se ha llegado demasiado lejos en esta persecución y que las élites políticas, las élites financieras y a veces las élites eclesiásticas de Occidente han abandonado a sus propios pueblos. Incluso el Papa llegó a afirmar en el año 2026 que en Occidente el espacio para la libertad de expresión se reduce rápidamente. En España acabamos de padecerlo. Hace una semana el presidente del Gobierno anunció la regularización de 500.000 de personas que están ilegalmente en nuestro país, con las consecuencias que eso tiene sobre la seguridad, sobre el colapso en los servicios públicos, el acceso a la vivienda. Bueno, una semana después el presidente del Gobierno ha anunciado que va a perseguir la huella del odio en las redes sociales. Es decir, no solo quieren condenar a nuestros pueblos a la invasión migratoria, porque esto no es inmigración, esto ya ha adquirido las dimensiones de una auténtica invasión migratoria, sino que quieren impedir a esos mismos pueblos que ven sus servicios públicos colapsados, su seguridad destrozada en las calles y la vivienda inalcanzable por esa presión migratoria, quieren condenarles al silencio y a la persecución. Pero yo soy muy optimista. Creo que, como decía en mitad de la intervención, la grieta en el muro es cada vez más grande y la libertad y la verdad harán como el agua, aprovechar cualquier grieta para abrirse paso. Muchas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. José Antonio Cast, presidente electo de la República de Chile desde diciembre del 2025, en las elecciones que le han dado el mayor número de votos de la historia del país. expresidente de la Red Política por los Valores, fundador y presidente del Partido Republicano de Chile, abogado, junto con su mujer Pía, que nos honra con su presencia hoy, padres de 9 hijos. Señor Cast.
Muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a todos por estar hoy día aquí. Quiero sí darle la partida, permitir que pueda partir Santiago, con quien nos reunimos muy temprano hoy día en Madrid. Hemos estado conversando durante este día y tiene que volver, porque tiene muchas actividades para que esa grieta crezca también en su nación. Así que, Santiago, te doy las gracias y permito que puedas partir para que no te deje el avión. Y le damos un aplauso a Santiago Abascal. Y quiero decirle que estoy muy contento, muy alegre de poder ver tantos rostros conocidos, tantos años de compartir, tantos vínculos generados a ambos lados del charco, como dirían mis amigos españoles. Estamos contentos de que se produzca esa alianza entre Estados Unidos y Europa para que nosotros tengamos un mercado más grande al cual venderle nuestros productos. Creo que esa unidad, esa alianza, tiene que verse reflejada también aquí en el Parlamento Europeo. Y por eso le doy las gracias a los dos presidentes de Patriots y de RC, de los reformistas, de estar aquí juntos, defendiendo los principios y valores de nuestra sociedad occidental. Gracias, Kinga, por estar aquí. Gracias, Mateus. Gracias a Santiago por su presencia. Quiero agradecerle también a los medios de comunicación que nos acompañan, que son fundamentales para dar a conocer lo que de verdad somos. Agradecerle también a nuestros amigos en las redes sociales, que nos acompañan permanentemente y difunden nuestras ideas. Gracias, Stepo, por encabezar esta gran organización. Gracias a Lola Velarde, que siempre se esconde en alguna parte para que nadie la pueda ver. Gracias a tu equipo, gracias a Elena, que también está por ahí, gracias a Rodrigo, que lo vi por aquí, gracias a Diego por el trabajo que realizan y a todos los jóvenes que nos acompañan de distintas partes del mundo y que permiten que todos nosotros podamos estar aquí tranquilos y que todo funcione bien. Muchas gracias y un gran aplauso para este gran equipo. Y quiero partir con una pregunta simple, pero profunda al mismo tiempo. ¿Por qué estamos aquí? ¿Por qué muchos de nosotros en nuestras naciones levantamos la voz incansablemente? Estamos aquí por convicción. Estamos aquí por ese gran anhelo de poner en acción todos nuestros sueños. Y estamos aquí para entregar toda nuestra fuerza y nuestro trabajo para alcanzar ese bien mayor para nuestras naciones, para nuestros compatriotas. La nación son personas y nosotros cada vez que nos reunimos tenemos que pensar en esas personas que más sufren, en esas personas más débiles, que tienen la esperanza puesta en cada uno de nosotros. Estamos aquí porque creemos en la libertad, en la dignidad y en el respeto por la persona humana, que siguen siendo los pilares irrenunciables de toda la civilización democrática. Cuando esos pilares se debilitan, no se cae solamente el sistema político, en el cual varios de nosotros estamos insertos. Si esos pilares se debilitan, se debilita la familia. Se silencia la conciencia, se fragmenta la sociedad, se erosiona la democracia desde dentro. Y hoy vivimos una paradoja inquietante. Mientras más se habla de derechos, más se restringe la libertad. Cuando la inseguridad domina las calles, cuando el crimen reemplaza al Estado, cuando las familias y comunidades viven atemorizadas, la democracia se vacía de contenido, porque la libertad se vuelve una mera ilusión. Por eso, defender la seguridad no es autoritarismo. Defender la libertad no es extremismo. Defender el orden no es regresión. Es simplemente defender las condiciones básicas para que cada sociedad pueda vivir y desarrollarse plenamente. Nuestra causa no es una ideología más. Nosotros abogamos por la realidad, por lo que cada uno puede entender desde la razón y desde la comprensión sencilla de la vida. Hoy estamos experimentando los frutos de una cultura dominada por los ismos. Y ustedes miran, ¿qué son los ismos? Dentro de los ismos está el ambientalismo extremo, que prioriza la naturaleza por sobre el ser humano. El animalismo radical. Nadie puede decir que nosotros no queremos y respetamos a los animales, pero ese animalismo radical antepone a los animales sobre la dignidad del ser humano. El feminismo ideológico, que enfrenta a hombres y mujeres en lugar de dignificarlos por igual. El indigenismo radical, que reemplaza a la integración y a la valoración de todos los miembros de la sociedad, independiente de su origen, por la fragmentación y la confrontación permanente, que es algo que vivimos en nuestras naciones y los que venimos de Sudamérica así lo evidenciamos. Estos ismos no buscan la justicia, buscan el poder mal entendido. No buscan la igualdad, sino que promueven la división. No buscan fortalecer la democracia, sino vaciarla y capturarla. Frente a esto, nuestra respuesta no es el odio ni la caricatura. Nuestra respuesta es la defensa de la naturaleza humana y el sentido común. Porque creemos en la persona no como una abstracción, sino como un ser concreto, con dignidad intrínseca. Creemos en la familia como lugar primario y último de nuestra existencia, el primer espacio de protección, de educación y amor, donde nos conocemos y comenzamos a relacionarnos como personas. Creemos en la libertad de expresión, aquella en la cual algunos no creen, algunos que creen que pueden silenciarnos con una manifestación, con una protesta, que quieren negarnos los espacios de libertad que ha conquistado la democracia. Y defendemos la libertad de expresión aún cuando sea incómoda. Por eso siempre hay que agradecer a los medios de comunicación y respetar la libertad de expresión amplia, siempre. Creemos también en la libertad de educación, para que los padres no sean reemplazados por el Estado en la educación de sus hijos. Creemos profundamente en la libertad de reunión y de culto, porque la conciencia no se administra desde el poder. Y también creemos que una sociedad sana no se construye sobre la imposición cultural, sino desde el respeto profundo por la realidad, por la historia y por la condición humana. Y aquí quiero ser muy claro. No basta con resistir, como muchos lo plantean. No basta con denunciar, como algunos lo hacen legítimamente. Y no basta con conservar los espacios. Tenemos que participar, tenemos que influir y ganar. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo en muchas naciones, en muchos espacios, con mucha alegría siempre. Siempre con esa alegría que nos da la sana conciencia. No esa ideología que va consumiendo a muchos por dentro y les quita esa alegría de vivir. No son capaces de compartir una sonrisa. Si ustedes se fijan, siempre hay una cara como de odio. Yo puedo no pensar como otro, puedo no participar en lo que él realiza, pero nunca lo voy a despreciar porque es una persona igual que yo, una persona que merece dignidad y respeto. Y tenemos que participar, influir. Tenemos que ganar en las ideas, porque nuestras ideas se defienden solas. Ellos tienen que usar la violencia para defender lo que ellos creen. La violencia física, la violencia verbal, la violencia digital, que hemos sufrido varios de los que estamos acá. pero vale la pena. Miren dónde llegué. Ajá. Y vale la pena siempre pensar en que esos jóvenes que muchas veces insultan, agreden, no han tenido la libertad de elegir. Su educación, su entorno los ha llevado a ser instrumentos en las manos de otros que los dirigen a distancia. Por eso siempre nuestra comprensión hacia aquellos jóvenes que actúan incluso con violencia. Siempre dedicarles una sonrisa amable, no irónica, una sonrisa de verdad, porque quizás no han encontrado todavía el camino para transmitir esa alegría que al menos yo he sentido desde siempre que he participado en política o en alguna organización social. Y si nosotros vamos dejando el vacío, si nosotros no participamos, si nosotros no influimos, hay muchos que están dispuestos a ocupar esos lugares sin complejo alguno. Llegan ahí vía democrática y no se quieren ir. Y modifican las leyes, modifican todo lo que esté a su alcance para perpetuarse en el poder. Y eso nosotros lo combatimos. Y Political Network for Values, desde su creación, y hago un saludo también a Jaime Mayor Oreja, que fue el primer presidente de Political Network for Values, ha entendido lo esencial, que esto no es solamente una batalla cultural, sino que también es una batalla política y moral. Y eso se junta todo en lo que están realizando desde esta gran institución que hoy día dirige mi amigo Stefan Bartulik. Así que, Stefan, gracias por encabezar esta organización y dedicarle tiempo a algo que no es un sacrificio, es una alegría. Así que cuando algún político les diga que se está sacrificando mucho por algo, no le crean y díganle que se cambie de trabajo. Porque para nosotros eso es una alegría, no es una carga. Y esta batalla la tenemos que dar en los parlamentos, tanto en nuestras naciones como en este Parlamento. Tenemos que darla en las aulas, tenemos que darla en los medios de comunicación. Nunca hay que desistir de ir a un medio de comunicación a defender nuestras ideas. Nunca hay que acobardarse, nunca hay que tenerle temor, porque tenemos las ideas que se defienden solas. Ellos no las tienen. Tenemos que dar esa batalla en nuestras familias, porque muchas veces por dar una batalla afuera, en la sociedad, olvidamos a los propios. Y nuestros hijos nos ven en los medios de comunicación, pero no nos ven en el hogar. Así que ahí también una invitación a que esa misma batalla que damos afuera, la demos al interior de nuestras familias, porque nuestros hijos también están amenazados por esta pseudo libertad. Tenemos que dar esta batalla en nuestras leyes y también en el lenguaje. Siempre cuidar el lenguaje respetuoso. Y por eso este espacio es tan importante. Este espacio genera vínculos. Yo miro algunas caras, veo naciones representadas por muchos de ustedes. Veo grandes amigos que he conocido en instancias como esta, que si no hubiese sido por Political Network for Values, no los habría conocido. Partiendo por Kinga, que nos recibió aquí mismo en algún momento. Gracias a cada uno de ustedes por lo que hace en sus naciones. Y sientan que están siempre conectados, vinculados a un gran grupo de personas. Aunque en sus naciones los apunten con el dedo, digan, yo no estoy solo, somos muchos y cada día vamos a ser más. Aquí se cultiva ese vínculo, aquí se cultiva la relación humana que nos permite llenarnos de energía para volver a nuestras naciones, a defender y a plantear nuestras ideas. Nosotros no planteamos aquí, jamás hemos planteado la exclusión. Siempre hemos estado por escuchar, por recibir. Aquí promovemos la vida, promovemos la familia, la verdad y la libertad. Y por eso agradezco de corazón la posibilidad de haber participado, de haber dirigido en algunos años con la colaboración de Lola y su equipo. Aquí el que hace de presidente recibe una gran colaboración. Se lleva los aplausos, pero el trabajo lo realizan otros, así que gracias de nuevo por ese trabajo. Gracias por haberme permitido liderar Political Network for Values. Y a pesar de lo que algunos decían, que si alguien lideraba una organización como esta, que defiende la familia, los valores, tenía poco futuro político, quiero decirles que se equivocaron. ¿Ah? Esto solo comienza. 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 Y si hay algo que nos enseña la historia es que cuando hombres y mujeres actúan con convicciones claras, con valentía, con serenidad y sentido común, las sociedades se levantan. Muchas veces esas sociedades están esperando a que alguien levante la voz. Y quizás puedan silenciar a algunos, pero siempre hay alguien que levanta la bandera. Así que si algún día silencian a alguno, otro levantará la bandera. Defender la libertad, y lo digo por amigos míos, ¿no es cierto?, que han sido abatidos, como fue el senador Jaime Guzmán en mi nación, que por defender las ideas con su voz fue abatido por las balas de los terroristas. Pero no se preocupen, todo va a estar bien. Siempre hay alguien que levanta la bandera de la libertad. Y defender la libertad hoy es un acto de coraje, al cual están llamados todos ustedes. Ese coraje que llena nuestra esencia. Defender la dignidad humana es un acto de rebeldía vanguardista al día de hoy, que mira hacia el futuro con optimismo. Defender la democracia real es un acto de responsabilidad histórica. Así que sigamos adelante con las ideas claras, con los pies en la realidad, con la mirada en el futuro y seguros de que todo va a estar bien porque Dios nos quiere y está a cargo. Muchas gracias.
We would like to invite Mr. Bartulica, Mr. Cast, Madam Gal, and Mr. Moravicki for a photo.
Eso, pero con velocidad. Here, there, you stay with me. We stay aquí. Ahí para que se vea. Sí, pero aquí. Ya, ahí. Come in front.
Ay, go.
Un momento. Patient. Gracias.
Atrás. Corre, muévete.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We will now be hearing from the current president of the Political Network for Values. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly be seated. We will now be hearing from Mr. Bartulica, the current president of the Political Network for Values. He's surrounded by members of the youth program of the Political Network for Values, 40 young leaders from 20 countries that have been attending a training program during the past days and are now serving as volunteers. We say serving because we view public service as a service in the common good. Mr. Bartulica is the president of the Political Network for Values. In 2020, he was elected to the Croatian Parliament, and in 2024 to the European Parliament, and sits within the group of European conservatives and reformists. He is the founder of the Center for the Renewal of Culture. He received a PhD in philosophy, in political philosophy and ethics from the Pontifical Gregorian University. Mr. Bartulica.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you. I will be very brief. I said this morning that I would take the opportunity at the end to thank everyone I have to thank. First, I would like to thank Almighty God for all his blessings that he has bestowed on us and bringing us all together today in the European Parliament. Next, of course, Lola Velarde and her team, their tireless work, their perseverance, they're really an inspiring group, and we can't thank them enough. So thank you again, Lola. Of course, I want to thank Jose Antonio for his leadership. I couldn't have imagined when we were together in Zagreb several years ago that I would be hosting you here as your successor at the head of the political network as the president-elect. So congratulations. It's an inspiring victory, landslide victory for all of us, and the world is paying attention. So Chile is blessed to have you, and I look forward to seeing you in Santiago next month. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard many great speeches. Jose Antonio mentioned several isms that we're dealing with today. Father Keeley mentioned dumptyism as perhaps a new threat to freedom of speech. I think we've all benefited greatly, at least I can speak for myself, from this summit. I like to use the example of hobbits from the Lord of the Rings. You know, we're usually under the surface trying to do some good. Today we rose to the surface, to be seen, and we will not be canceled. We will not be bullied or silenced by anyone. We will speak the truth with conviction and above all with charity. We are not opposed to anyone. We have a mission and a duty to raise our voices to protect the natural family, but also unborn children, and we will continue to do that. Finally, thank you to the ECR group, also to the Patriots. I think it's a very good sign, very encouraging that our two groups could come together and collaborate at such a level to do an event. Many times in Europe, they find easy excuses why not to collaborate, but that wasn't the case today, and I'm very grateful. So again, thank you all. I wish you to join us for a reception afterwards at the hotel. I think we have much to celebrate, and again, God bless you.
Honourable members of the European Parliament,
Ladies and gentlemen, as we highlighted earlier, these are participants in the youth program of the Political Network for Values. 40 young leaders from 20 countries that have been attending a training program during the past days and have been serving us as we view the political life as a service to the common good. So thank you to our youth participants.
honorable members of the European Parliament, and present authorities. We, the youth of the 7th Transatlantic Summit held at the European Parliament, in light of the dialogues we have witnessed here, recognize ourselves as united as a generation facing an urgent question. Will the future inherit our silence or our courage? From across continents and contexts, a common thread runs through our experiences. Freedom of expression is at risk. Different realities, same danger. There is a growing gap between the freedom of expression our Constitution and laws proclaim and the actual freedom people experience in our street, public spheres, and media. Even as we speak, many voices are silenced, persecuted, or threatened, and subtle but powerful forms of disguised censorship are also advancing, such as cancel culture, social stigmatization, and the manipulation of language. What is at stake is much more than numbers. It is people.
Some are here with us today. Others were silenced, like Charlie Kirk. Today, we make a commitment that their voices will continue to speak through ours. It is for them and for those who will come after us that we respond clearly. We want the future to inherit our courage. We are guided by a shared conviction that the freedom to express one's convictions peacefully and respectfully is not an abstract principle or a mere legal guarantee, but an essential dimension of every human being. It implies recognition of the voice of conscience and the centrality of the search for truth. Freedom of speech is a necessary condition for responsible participation in public life. We commit ourselves to living in truth and exercising our freedom responsibly. We want to build and protect spheres and spaces for dialogue and debate in our communities, universities, workplaces, associations, and digital platforms. Moreover, we commit to forming ourselves and others to speak with solid foundations, respecting our interlocutors, and always seeking to build bridges on what unites us.
And today, from this Parliament, we make a fraternal appeal to the policymakers, legislators, and civil leaders here to transform the ties forged or strengthened at this summit into synergies in favor of a public agenda, promoting freedom of conscience, thought, and expression. Promote a roadmap to ensure the effective recognition of freedom of expression, grounded in the best practices and experiences of our continents. Protect freedom of education, and in particular, guarantee that our universities are open spaces where ideas can be exchanged and where free and respectful debates can flourish. Resist restrictive laws and regulations that attempt to limit freedom of conscience, thought, and expression, including those applied to digital platforms. Build a political culture that strengthens freedom of expression and generates channels for civic participation, where speech and dialogue occupy a central space.
We choose courage over silence, to honor those who came before us, and to take responsibility for protecting those who will come after us. We choose freedom as a task and embrace, as you do, the sanity of life, the centrality of family, and the fundamental freedoms. From Brussels, we offer this declaration not as a closing statement, but as the beginning of a joint effort to build a future in which freedom of expression is not only written into our laws, but is lived and springs from the hearts of our peoples. Our voice and our commitment will forge the new era that is dawning. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Let's keep the fight.
Thank you.
One here.
Yes, I'm here. Una selfie con Sembro, me cachó. Bueno. Sí, bueno.